Izuku was born with a strange power, as when he was born his mother had been very proud to have him as well as his father, who left for milk. Deku had a green horn in his head that had grew ever since he was a young child and had become much larger as he had approached the age of 4 years old, when children were known to have their quirks grow, as well as begin to develop into a full-blown quirk. Deku wasn't bullied by Bakugo and his friends as a child because they already had deducted that he'd have some sort of quirk just because humans don't generally have horns. His quirk would violently awaken, however, on January 13th, around 8 years before he'd be going to middle school, before he goes into UA. Deku's quirk would awaken. As Deku is currently rushed away from the other students, Deku's power would awaken as his green horn would begin to grow. What's happening, he would think, as suddenly electricity began to spark off his horn as he falls over, touching a small bug, it instantly disappearing. This is when Deku would be taken to the doctor without being touched, as Izuku Midoriya didn't want to hurt his mom, of course. As Izuku finally makes it to the doctor's office, the doctor would run some tests as he had now calmed down, deducing that Deku has a very special power that allows him to rewind all living objects. This power is extremely unique and is very rare to find. The doctor would recommend to Deku to not use his quirk as much as possible. However, Deku, who'd always wanted to be a hero, would train his quirk as soon as he got out of the doctor's office. He would tell his mom he's going outside to go play with Bakugo and his friends, when in reality he'd go to the back of the forest where he and Bakugo would explore, as he heard that his quirk, called Rewind, has the ability to touch and change life. So if I can do that, then Deku would think, as he holds his hand onto a tree, he thinks about All Might, his favorite hero, and how he had saved all those people. If I could do that, then... As Deku closes his eyes, he would focus on rewinding the tree back to a sapling, and he then turns back an imaginary clock in his head, spinning it quickly. Green lightning would flow off of the horn on the right side of his head as it grows longer. Just as he does this, Deku's eyes would light up green as he opens them, seeing the tree now become a young sapling. Deku would then touch the tree again as he then tells it to grow. The tree would then explode back to its original length, creating a large sound and reverberation of wind through the forest. That's it, Deku would think. As for the next few years, he would begin working on training his quirk to the highest degree as he can. Deku would have mastered his rewind quirk to a almost perfect T, as Deku being a smart and intelligent student, as well as a person who always wanted a quirk and to be a person who wanted to be a hero, he would train his quirk quite often. Deku was renowned in school, which caused Bakugo to have some sort of rivalry with him, as Bakugo was always the one who destroyed things with his explosion quirk, while Deku could rewind them. As Deku's rewind quirk would grow, he would quickly become adjusted to learning about a new power that he would be attaining very soon. As Deku's new abilities begin to start showing, Deku was now at the end of middle school, as he's preparing to take his entrance exam for UA. He's been training for a long time now, little bits at a time, but still, he's gaining much control over his quirk, and his mom doesn't even have to be afraid of him using it now, as he can use it on pretty much anything and control it whenever he needs to. As opposed to Eri, who would be born a few years after Deku, who has no control over her quirk after the trauma that had affected her due to it. Back to that later, though. As we see Deku now being a middle schooler, his horn's much longer now, as it looks more obtuse on his forehead, as having his quirk grow too. This is when we see the sludge monster running through the streets from All Might, as we see it about to pounce Deku. This kid could be a nice flush suit for me to get out of here. I didn't know he was in town, he would say, as he then tries to jump Deku. Immediately, as soon as he touches Deku's body, Deku would use his rewind quirk. As he uses rewind on the sludge villain would be rewinded as his body and his quirk would be rewinded back to a normal human. What? This man would appear, a man who looked nothing like this sludge monster. You took my quirk away. Damn you. Deku would hold his hand out and say that he can take much more than that if he tries to fight him, and that he's not one yet, but he's going to be a hero someday. Deku would show determination in his eyes, as we then see All Might appear, laughing as he tells this young man, having seen his ability, telling him that he did a great job. Deku would look up, asking what he means, when All Might would then appear as he's in awe. All Might! Is that you? As All Might would then now have come down, he would greet him as Izuku would introduce himself, mumbling, saying that his name is Izuku Midoriya. This is when Izuku would then, as he's touching the sludge monster guy, who's just a normal dude now, would turn into a baby. He would give the baby to All Might and say that he'll turn him back later, once they get to the police station, if that's alright. But Deku would say this as he smiles, with him shaking a little at the knees, having seen All Might. All Might would pat him on the back and ask if he wants anything after taking down that villain for him. Deku would say he just would really like his autograph as he holds out his notebook for him. All Might would laugh and say of course as he takes out this autograph and would then give it back to him. Deku would then rewind the baby back to the adult dude as they then put him into jail, having his quirk taken away. That's a pretty interesting power you have there, kid. Deku and All Might would have this conversation as they're walking away from the police station. You think so? Deku would ask All Might, as he's still nervous around him. All Might would tell him that he's actually been hoping to begin to work at the school UA here and was wondering if he'd be applying. Deku would nod eagerly, saying that he's actually going to be applying for the hero exam this year, and All Might would smile, saying he'll be eagerly watching, as now he's found another candidate for One for All. Deku continues to train until the final examinations are coming. A flashback as Deku's walking home to the day just earlier before the sludge monster incident. We see Deku taking notes as he's writing in class, with the teacher asking what they all want to be, with everyone wanting to be a hero, of course. Bakugo would laugh as he calls them all sidekicks, with Deku looking up, as they would ask who wants to go to UA. Bakugo and Deku would both raise their hands, with no one in class being surprised that either of them are going to. Deku having an extreme control over his powerful quirk, along with Bakugo. Bakugo after class would confront Deku and tell him that he's going to get a higher score on this nerd no matter what. He would then poke Deku in the chest and tell him he'll see him in the exam, as he then smiles as he runs off with his other friends. Deku would turn around as he smiles, saying he'll see Kacchan later, as he would then jump out the window, just like Kacchan would have said in the original. However, this time, just as he's falling, Deku would throw a seed down, as he uses Rewind to create a great tree. Just as the tree catches him, he would then rewind the tree back to his seedling, as he then puts it back into his pocket. This was a handy trick he had learned from that incident in the forest years ago. Anyway, back to walking home. Deku would go home and just nothing would happen at this time yet. Many months would pass, as now the 6 months before the UA examination had passed, with Deku having trained his physical body just a little bit, but mostly working on his quirk. As Deku would now arrive at the UA examination, Deku would be ready, as now the starting bell begins, with him and Bakugo being in separate areas, unfortunately for the two of them. Ito would see Deku and ask him what his quirk is after seeing his horn, probably thinking it's some sort of monstrosity or some sort of mutation quirk, with Deku not saying that he'll see what it is. As they get into the examination, there'd be many robots. Dang, I can't rewind these, Deku would think, as he then rushes over towards one of the large robots. Take this. Deku would hold out a small seed again in his hand as he's about to smash into the robot. What's he doing? As Deku is throwing seeds into all the robots inside of their gears, he would then hold his hands together as some sort of green electricity would connect all of them. Rewind, he would say, as he then winds all of them back into trees, exploding almost 10 robots in one shot. Impressive, he can control and grow life? Interesting, Ito would think as he goes running around hitting more robots. After a long time of them fighting, All Might would see Deku fighting his way through and be impressed. As now, the 0-point robot would arrive. He would hear a scream. That girl. Deku would have a flashback again to earlier that day when he'd been walking in and had almost tripped over himself with Ochako saving him. I have to save her no matter what. As Deku runs forward, he puts his hand into his pockets as he grabs all of the seeds he had brought with in order to take down the examination. This is when the giant 0-point robot's about to crush Uraraka. Deku would scream, "Great forest tree!" as he then throws all the seeds directly in front of Uraraka as he jumps in front of her, protecting her. The giant foot's about to stomp the both of them when Uraraka is shocked. Suddenly, a ginormous tree, huge and hundreds of feet taller than skyscrapers, would begin to pierce through the robot as it stabs it through the chest. This humongous tree would then shrink back to normal as the robot falls over, Deku picking up all the seeds that he had dropped and putting them back in his pocket. The robot having been completely destroyed, All Might would have made up his mind. This kid has got some potential, and with One for All, what else could he do with that rewind quirk of his? Deku would help Uraraka up and thank her for helping him earlier that day, and now they're even as he smiles. Uraraka would laugh as she asks him what that was, and Deku would say it's his quirk, Rewind. Deku and Uraraka would quickly become friends, as the two then head off to go and destroy more monsters and more robots. Deku would finish in first, beating Bakugo with a score of 30 points higher after defeating that big robot, getting 60 villain points as well as another 40 hero points for saving Uraraka from the big monster. Deku would be very proud of himself as he would see that Uraraka had actually gone in too. That must be who that girl was who I'd saved and who had saved me, he would think, as he then heads home smiling. Just as he's heading home from the exam, preparing to leave the school, All Might would confront him as he prepares to ask him something. Young Midoriya, I need to have a conversation with you in private, as I want to talk to you about something. As Deku and All Might would be pulled into a separate room, All Might would begin to have a conversation with Deku and explain to him something. My power is known as One for All. The power that's been passed on for generations, 9 times in fact, at this very day, for you to be the 9th user. What are you talking about? Deku would say, as All Might would smile, saying that, I want you to be the next user of One for All, to inherit my power. Deku would be shocked as he asked what he means, when All Might would say if he takes his DNA, then he will inherit One for All, which will give him enough strength to be equal or even more powerful than I am. Deku would be surprised, as he had never thought about this before and had been thinking about what All Might's quirk would be, but he'd always assumed it had been super strength or super speed or some sort of amplification quirk. Then, you sure you want to give it to me? I'm just a newbie. You could give it to someone else. There's no way I'm worthy of something like that. All Might would laugh as he says that there's no one but you, and that you are my first choice, and it's all up to you. What do you say, kid? This is when Deku would smile, as he says that he accepts, and that he accepts All Might's power. All Might would give him a thumbs up as he says they need to get training immediately if they want to give him his quirk before school starts. For the next 2 weeks before the acceptance letters were sent out, All Might and Deku would be doing extreme training at Kamina Beach. For 2 weeks straight, they'd be doing intense training, drinking protein shakes, as Deku's body is much stronger than it was without a quirk, as bodies with quirks are much more powerful, so it doesn't take him too much time to get ready for One for All to accept it. Deku would then take in All Might's hair as he eats it and takes the power of One for All with him. This new change that he would experience though in his quirk, All Might would explain to him that One for All doesn't just amplify your physical abilities, it also gives you more power on any quirks that you happen to possess already, which means your Rewind quirk will be even more amplified with some sort of ability. Deku would try using his seed trick as he tries to create a tree, and it goes much faster than he had actually anticipated, with him activating maybe One for All just a bit into his quirk. What the? It's so strong! Deku hasn't even been using 1% on his quirk because his body can't use 100% yet. However, Deku is getting the hang of it as he continues working on this. As they walk away, however, little did they know at the beach, before they finished clearing all the trash, something that Izuku had done before they left without them noticing. An old rusty refrigerator, as they'd walked away, began to return to its former self, as a brand new, white, clean, shiny refrigerator is that now standing there. That's right, Deku's Rewind quirk of One for All inhabiting it as well gives him the ability to alter and control and rewind life and non-living things, which gives Deku basically control over time of objects. Deku wouldn't know about this yet, however, as he would then be ready for the acceptance, hoping that he would get in. Deku would now accept his acceptance as the letter comes to him congratulating young Midoriya on getting into UA. The first day would arrive, as his mom is so proud of him and would give him that hero suit he had designed a long time ago. And as Deku would then head to school for the first time, he'd see the giant doors, thinking why it's so big, when he opens the door and sees his classmates inside. It's that nice girl from before, he would think. As Ochaka comes running from behind him, he would turn around and see her as she then asks if his name's Deku, right? And Deku would then say that that's actually something Bakugo calls him as a nickname. Ochako would say she likes it, and she's going to call him Deku too. With Ida welcoming Deku to the class, saying that what he had done with that 0-point robot was extremely impressive. Bakugo wouldn't be that surprised though, as Deku had high control over his quirk. However, he doesn't know about Deku's new ability. As Deku would then sit down for class, Aizawa would then roll into the classroom in his sleeping bag, asking if they were there to socialize or if they were there to train to become heroes. All the students in Class 1A would then ask Aizawa-sensei if they're going to the welcoming for the freshman class. He would say that's lame, as they're going to go on and do a physical test of their strengths and their quirks. Deku would be worried about this, as his quirk is much more used for tactical attacks rather than speed or power. He was worried, but then he remembered that he had One for All. I just have to use One for All then. I know I can do this. As Deku would then get down to the area below, now wearing the gym PE outfits, they get ready for the exam. The 50-meter dash. Ida would then easily storm this. However, Deku isn't willing to put it all in yet, as he doesn't know how much of One for All he can actually use. Deku still thinks of One for All as not something a part of him, and so he doesn't have full mastery over it yet, so no full cowling. This is when, after some average stunts, suddenly the weight grip test would begin. He'd realize how he can do this, as he then realizes that wood branches have incredible strength. He had placed 2 seeds of a tree, just as he had been using before for the cup several times, as he then creates tree branches to help him with his grip strength and clutch around as he clutches it, giving him a high PSI, as now he has a high grip strength, which is his highest score so far. His next highest thing would be the long jump, as he creates a large tree which would spring him all the way to the end, faster than anyone else, giving him a higher long jump than even Froppy. Now it was time for the ball throw, as he was deciding this is when he's going to show off one for all. As he then holds the ball, he would then channel Rewind as his horn begins to shoot electricity all around him. He would channel one for all into the very tip of his pinky, as he knows from All Might that it can damage his body. However, Deku can rewind living things. As he charges all of one for all into his right arm, he's going to go all out. Aizawa would narrow his eyes as he sees what's going on, and however he doesn't activate, and as he's activating his quirk to turn off Deku's quirk, Deku would then stop, asking Aizawa-sensei why he stopped him. Aizawa would warn him about damaging his body and seeing what kind of power he's using. Baku would be confused by this remark, but Deku would understand what he's saying. He tells Aizawa that he's got this, and as he takes the ball, he tells him he's ready. He would then blow the whistle as Deku takes the ball and charges all of one for all into his right arm. He would then step forward as he then says, "Here we go, Detroit Smash!" He throws the ball with as hard of a force as he can and feels his right arm explode in pain. The skin is red now as he feels his entire arm shatter. Deku would then see as the ball goes flying, getting 1,000 meters, an even higher score than Baku had got. However, before anyone can notice, Deku would then take his other arm as he slams into his right arm and uses Rewind to a few seconds ago. As he rewinds his arm back, now Deku has no damage from one for all, faster than anyone could notice. That was incredible, Baku would be thinking, but how? His quirk doesn't have that kind of power. It's more for tactful uses rather than just raw strength. What was that? Deku would look over at Aizawa, who would nod as he walks back. Ochako would be impressed, not thinking he had that kind of physical strength. Little does everyone know, however, that he has All Might's power with him now, too. This is when Deku would realize something. What the? He turned around as all the class look up, seeing the baseball that he threw begin to wind backwards. What? He'd used Rewind on his right arm. The baseball was coming back to him. This is an inanimate object, though, he'd be thinking, as his eyes begin to shake, looking at the ball. As the ball comes flying towards him, he catches it out of midair, as he hands it to Aizawa-sensei, Aizawa being confused. Does this mean I can rewind objects? He'd be thinking as he has the flashback of All Might telling him about how One for All amplifies your quirk. Deku would walk away as he thinks about this, with him now thinking about his new life here. Deku's walking away slowly, as his hand is shaking. He turns around realizing what's going on, when suddenly we hear Bakugo. "Deku, what the hell was that?" Bakugo would scream in his raspy voice that he always uses. Deku would turn around as he looks at Bakugo, or Kachan in his mind, and asks what he means. Bakugo would be running at him now just like he did before, and asking what the hell that power was. As he continues rushing towards Deku, Aizawa would quickly get in the way as he uses his scarf to block Deku and protect him. Now, class. No fighting unless it's for sparring or for some sort of class test. We don't permit it on campus, Aizawa would say calmly, as Bakugo makes a sound of annoyance, telling him that he wants to find out more, and he better tell him what's going on later. Deku would turn away with his eyes filled with guilt, as he doesn't want to tell Kachan or lie to him about One for All. As Deku walks away, Uraraka, as well as who would watch his quirk in action, would wonder why he simply hadn't used that ability on the giant robot, which could have just rewinded it all the way back to before it had come out onto the stadium. With Deku now wondering about what his quirk can actually do, he decides he needs to test it, as now the tests are over. Deku would actually scale pretty high, and Mineta would get expelled. With Mineta now gone, half of the My Hero Academia fanbase now sighs in relief, as we then see Deku beginning to go back to his house. Deku's home now after his first day, and he needs to talk to All Might about this. He'd call All Might on his phone and tell All Might what happened. All Might, yeah, I already heard. I watched the whole thing. All I would say is he had been watching the test to see how Izuku would do. Midoriya would then tell All Might that he can now rewind non-living things. All Might would tell him that this ability he should try to keep under wraps is almost a secret weapon, as we had registered you underneath the power to rewind living things, and it would seem very odd for you to just suddenly develop a new power to your already strong quirk. All Might would then tell Deku this, who would agree, and as Deku tells him he's going to start working on it to see what else he can do. Deku's at home when he then decides to try something on a glass. He'd grab a glass from the kitchen as he tells his mom that he's just grabbing one for a glass of water, and so he would then go up to his room and place it down on his desk. As Deku would then focus, you can see the green electricity covering his horn as he then gently touches the glass. Suddenly, the entire glass would begin to heat up as it then reverberates before it begins to turn into sand. I see. So I can turn things back into their original forms? Deku would go to sleep as he thinks and ponders about this question about himself now. What else can I do with it, he would think. The next day would come, and as the day would turn to a week, this is when All Might would enter the classroom. All Might? Deku would say, as All Might enters class with laughter as a smile is on his face. Hello, students. As for now, I'll be one of your teachers for your hero courses, as this is Class 1A after all of the hero course. Now, our first examination today will be splitting you up into teams, and you can put your costumes on for the first time, as well as letting you all do your first actual test as heroes. All Might would say, as he then tells them to all get suited up and ready for action. Deku's costume is a slight bit different in this, as it still looks pretty similar to the original. However, on the side he has bigger pockets which he can use and all have different labels on them, with different color codes, so that way he knows exactly what's in each pocket. Each one has different types of seeds as well as different items he can use with his rewind quirk in order to grow and use them to attack enemies. Deku would be all prepared now as he has his full hero costume on. Deku would head outside as he then meets up with everyone else ready for their exam. As All Might would then tell them to get ready for this test of sorts, they would then begin to be sorted into teams. Team A and Team D would be, well, Deku and Uraraka on the hero team, with Bakugo as well as Ida on the enemy team. As for the villains, as they then are explained to the assignment, there'll be a bomb placed in this building. Of course, the bomb is fake though, so you don't have to worry about it going off or anything like that. Your mission, heroes, is to reclaim the bomb or grab all the enemy villains and capture them. He gives out the capture tape and then tells everyone to get ready as the building, as they have to find which floor the bomb would be placed on. Deku would tell Uraraka he can quite easily get the bomb if he wanted to, but it's up to Uraraka if she wants to or not. Uraraka would nod, asking what Deku is going to do, as Deku would charge One for All throughout his entire body. As he then simply places his hand on the building, he would then think, rewind. His horn begins to glow as suddenly the concrete that's made the entire building begins to turn back to concrete dust and sand as it begins to liquefy. What's going on? Bakugo would think as Deku feels his hand beginning to burn. Damn it, I don't have much longer. As he then suddenly snaps out of it, realizing he can't manipulate such large objects so easily without practicing first. The entire building now looks almost slushified, as everything is basically melted, as the bomb as well as Ida and Baku have now fallen down the floors, with now the building just being mush. What did you do? Deku would laugh as he says this isn't going to be too big of a problem, as he then tells Bakugo and Ida that they should let him have the bomb. They tell him no way in hell, as Baku would then rush towards Deku. Deku would easily pop out a simple palm tree seed as he then throws it towards Bakugo, it rewinding itself forward as it then suddenly bursts into a full-size tree, hitting Bakugo into the air. Uraraka, go get the bomb. I'll handle these two. As Deku would suddenly throw out several dozen sunflower seeds around Ida, the sunflowers begin to grow, wrapping around his legs as he can't escape their vines. As Bakugo then would begin to leap down towards Deku, he would then try to use his gauntlet on him. Deku would simply touch the gauntlet, as he then reverses the gauntlet's intake of sweat, reversing all the sweat back into Bakugo's body, as Bakugo now has retained hydration, as his sweat's all gone. What just happened? Bakugo would think, as his entire tank is now empty again. You might want to make sure that you have your gas filled next time, Deku would say, as he then punches Bakugo, sending him flying backwards, as he uses a bit of One for All. He would then use Rewind in his hand extremely fast to fix it, while Ida breaks out of the sunflowers trying to get after Uraraka. Uraraka grabs the bomb and the hero team wins. Just as All Might's about to criticize Deku for destroying the building, Deku would tell him to give him a second, as he then uses One for All again, with him placing his hand on the mushed building and rewinding it back to its full size. Well, I hope that's better, All Might. Deku would then have a major applause from the entire rest of the hero course, as he had simply just fixed an entire building. This quirk was revolutionary. He could fix entire cities if they were destroyed by villains now. That quirk is extremely versatile for a hero, Yaoyorozu would be thinking, as she notices how Deku easily, almost with no effort, fixed it. In fact, it was fixed so well it looked like it had never been damaged in the first place. Bakugo and Ito would both easily be mad, as they say it's not fair for them to just take out the entire building like that, and that's a misuse of this entire training session. Deku would say that there was no rule placed like this, and that it was under his right to do so, as he sticks his tongue out. This would become Bakugo to become furious and enraged, as he then tells Deku he's going to win the next one easily, as Deku would walk away with Uraraka and him getting extremely high points. With the next few teams going, as Todoroki pulled the same stunt, using his ice to completely freeze the entire building, just as Deku would use his quirk to manipulate the entire building, making it look like Todoroki stole his idea. Deku would congratulate Todoroki on that, saying that was a good move, as Todoroki would look coldly at him, thinking that Deku is the biggest threat in the entire class to him. As Deku would now be known as an extremely powerful hero, just based off how his quirk works, All Might would congratulate Deku after the class was over, with Bakugo heading out of school, and him being more enraged as he had lost to Deku, which, as in this version, he isn't as down as he was in the original, just because Deku wasn't quirkless. He knows that Deku's strong, but he doesn't like losing still. So, he's still enraged and tells All Might that he's going to become the most powerful and the #1 hero, and Deku can never beat him. As Deku would then watch as Bakugo walks away, Deku would then get ready for his homework for the rest of his classes. Several days would go by, leading to weeks, when they'd be told that now the next examination would be taking place. The entire class would be told by Aizawa that they'd be heading over to the USJ for a physical test that they'd be taking to practice rescues. As Uraraka and several other the girls in class are excited about this, Deku would be ready for pretty much anything. However, none of them were expecting what was going to be coming that day, as Deku and Class 1A would be heading out to the USJ. Deku and the rest of Class 1A would then be heading out as they finally arrive. As they are greeted by 13, who has welcomed them, the Black Hole hero who is known famously for her disaster rescue teams. She would then tell everyone about the USJ, the Unforeseen Simulation Joint, as well as what they'll be doing today. This is all disrupted though, however, when a black portal begins to emerge from behind. What's happening? Deku would be thinking, as everyone in Class 1A is beginning to feel fear. All Might hadn't come with that day, as even he was still resting after he had done so much hero work earlier that morning. So they had no one else besides Aizawa and 13. Deku and the rest of the students would try to escape, as Aizawa tells them to stay there, with him rushing down to battle all the villains that have just emerged. As now, you see Kurogiri beginning to use his attacks. He would suddenly create those black portals around all of the Class 1A students, beginning to split them up. 13 would try to battle, as she's then harmed very much by the portal ability of Kurogiri, with now Deku watching in horror as he sees 13 and Aizawa in danger. He would tell everyone to get behind him as he tells them that he'll protect them all, with Bakugo as well as Todoroki and Kirishima not being behind that. As Deku throws down some seeds, he'd create humongous trees, using redwood seeds which are incredibly rare and hard to get. As he uses 5 of them, he would completely surround them as he grows the wood out to hundreds of years in advance, creating almost an impenetrable wall of wood surrounding the entire class. Everyone stay behind. As long as they can't get in here, then we should be safe, as it would take some of an immensely powerful fire quirk to even burn these down. This is one of my most powerful in my arsenal, he would think, as he didn't really want to show it off so early. This wall defense would then have some struggles by Kurogiri, as he tries to break through, as Deku had wound it so tightly around the class. This is when he would use his portal to rip one of the trees apart, as Deku's shocked, seeing that he could actually do that. As Kurogiri then absorbs the entire class, Deku would do one last thing as he absorbs and rewinds all the seeds, picking them back up quickly as he's then sucked into the portal. This is when he sees Froppy and himself being there, as Mineto's not here in this scenario because he was, well, not accepted into UA. So it's just Froppy and Deku. Deku would tell Froppy to not worry about it, and that they can do this easily together. He would ask her what she thinks on the situation, as they are in a water-based area. She would ask him if he has any ideas, and she said that she could probably jump out of here pretty easily and escape them, as she's very fast in the water, but she doesn't know about Deku. Deku would say he'll be fine, as he quickly decides he can make a bridge. He would throw down about 17 seeds of normal pine trees, as he then creates a humongous bridge of trees across the entire lake, from the boat stretched to the shore. That's just unfair, the villains in the water would be thinking, as Deku and Froppy would simply walk across the high bridge and make it safely to shore. Oh, and just for good measure, he would say, as he then disables all of the trees, pulling the seeds back to him using his inanimate object rewind ability. He would then shove his hand into the water, as he then tells Froppy to get back from the water. He would use rewind on the water, as suddenly he would then be able to, now he can use inanimate objects, he would rewind the water back to a state of being frozen, back in its time when it had been in some sort of cold environment, as he rewinds it thousands of years to the point where it had been. All of the water would suddenly sublimate as it turns into ice, covering all the villains and freezing them in their place. Deku would punch his hand out of the ice and then pulls it up, telling it no biggie. Froppy would be severely impressed, saying, "How do you know you could do that?" "I didn't. I just figured I'd try it since everything now I can touch can be rewinded. So, water has 3 different forms. If I could do that, then they'd be stuck." As Deku would say that, they'd walk away from the frozen lake, as they would then see Nomu fighting Aizawa. Even though Aizawa is canceling out Nomu's quirks, this is when we would see that Aizawa is about to be defeated, as his head is grabbed by the head Nomu. "Froppy, stay back," Deku would say, as his eyes are full of fear. Aizawa-sensei, he would rush forward as the Nomu turns, seeing Deku. Deku would quickly speed up as he rushes towards the Nomu. "I just need to touch it," he would think, as he then touches the Nomu for 1 second. It's over. As Nomu is touched by Deku, Nomu would show almost no reaction, as we see Shigaraki laughing, saying nothing you can do is going to work. This was designed to kill All Might. Suddenly, we see him stop as he's looking in horror, with Aizawa being surprised as well. Deku would use Living Rewind, as he uses his base quirk on the Nomu. "I'll just simply turn it back to before it had so much power," as he rewinds Nomu all the way back to a human baby. "What the? This thing was human?" Deku would think as he sees a small child there, along with some other strange mechanical devices that have now been pulled out of its body, as other experimental objects must have been used on this poor child, or adult even. He would then tell Aizawa there's no need to worry now, as this is when Shigaraki would be surprised, asking what that was. This is when we see Deku turn towards Shigaraki and say he might take his quirk too. As Shigaraki's shocked, he tells Kurogiri they have to escape, as there's someone here who has this similar abilities to All For One. Deku would ask what that means, as All Might hasn't told him about All For One yet. With Shigaraki making a quick escape, this is when we realize that All Might hadn't even arrived yet. A few minutes later, Ito would come back with Aizawa, with all the heroes, as well as All Might having arrived. With Aizawa thanking Deku for saving him, Deku would ask if everyone had any injuries, as he uses Rewind on them to rewind all their injuries back. With Deku basically saving the entire USJ incident and not having any trouble with the Nomu, as well as getting all of the things that had been used on this guy in order to create him into a Nomu, this is probably the best scenario for the USJ that could have happened. As Deku would then tell All Might everything, as well as him mentioning some guy called All For One, All Might would be worried, as he tells Deku that All For One is someone who has the ability to steal quirks. To steal quirks, he would think, as All Might would nod, saying that All For One is the enemy of One For All. He, in fact, is the main reason why our quirk was created. Deku would listen intently, as All Might would explain everything to him. The USJ incident would become less and less famous than it was in the original, as no one, especially not Aizawa, didn't get hurt, as they had no injuries either, with no one having any injuries of any kind, meaning that Deku basically saved the day. With now the USJ incident being over, everyone in UA is worried, although the newscasters don't know about how big of a deal it was when the League of Villains had intervened in this test. Everyone in UA knows that something big is about to happen, and something will be happening very soon. However, that can wait until the sports festival. It's been a few weeks now since the USJ incident has occurred, and Deku, as well as everyone else, has now gotten accustomed back to school life at UA. Deku being now more famous than he had before, after he had taken care of a majority of the League of Villains using his powers. Deku had become one of the more popular people in class, actually, as Deku was actually kind of shy about it, with everyone complimenting him a lot more. This actually made Uraraka feel jealous for some reason, but she couldn't place why. Anyway, Aizawa would come into class, and, not being all bandaged up, would begin to talk about the sports festival which would be coming up. A sports festival, Deku would ask, as he asked if this is really appropriate right now after the League of Villains had attacked. Aizawa would nod, saying that he thinks it's a good idea for everyone to seem calm and relaxed, for the public to know that UA is just as strong as it ever has been. Not to mention that this is a very important examination for them as well, as a sports festival can be what can push people from UA to become actual heroes from interest from other heroes already in the work field. Deku as well as Bakugo would both be interested by this, as Aizawa would explain the prospects that you can gain from entering the sports festival, as well as why they want to try and win it. Deku would be now hyped more than ever, as he's ready for the sports festival, thinking that he's going to take the top spot for All Might. Anyway, we have a flashback to just after the USJ incident. All Might would show Deku his wound for the first time, as he tells Deku that All For One was actually the person who created this. Deku would be shocked, as he then asks All Might if he wants him to fix it for him. What? All Might would ask. Deku would tell him that he can probably fix it, as it's a living material, so he can rewind it. And now with his, One For All affecting his ability, making it so he can affect even non-living materials, even if he has plastics from surgeries previously in there, he can actually rewind it all back to his body from however many years ago he fought All For One. All Might would be shocked, as he had never thought of this concept, and then tells Deku to give it a try, as it might be worth it. As Deku places his hand on All Might, he'd be shocked at how much plastic as well as other materials have been shoved into All Might's body. Damn, your entire respiratory system was almost completely destroyed. He'd begin rewinding All Might as the color of green would begin to illuminate around All Might's body in his wound area. Suddenly, we would hear a stretching sound as all of All Might's limbs begin to change, as suddenly All Might's body would begin to buff up. The wound where All Might had received damage from All For One was now completely gone, as Deku had rewinded All Might's body to back before he and All For One had their battle. This means that All Might now has access to use more of his leftover sparks of One For All, as All Might then buffs up, telling Deku that he feels great, with Deku smiling, saying he's glad he could help. This means that All Might is now more in commission than he ever would have been before, as he can actually breathe and go into his form without coughing up blood. Deku and All Might would now both be able to use One For All pretty efficiently, as All Might isn't weakened anymore. So, anyway, back to the present. Deku and Baku and everyone else in Class 1A are now preparing for the sports festival, as it's only going to be a week away. Deku would be at home practicing as he trains with making flowers as well as other plant life, as he always has, grow immediately and then shrink, as he increases his speed in doing so back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. As he works on this, his mom would be very proud of him, as she asks him what he'd like for dinner that night. Deku would smile as he says he'll take whatever she can make for him, which makes her happy as well, because Deku's usually been a very soft-hearted and pretty timid as well, so this was not that out of the ordinary. Anyway, a week would pass, as now the sports festival had finally arrived. Deku, as well as the rest of Class 1A, would be ready for the sports festival, as they get into their gym clothes for their participation, and get down to the actual stadium area. As everyone's excited about these tests, Deku would be a little worried about what's going to happen, as his quirk is pretty usable in most scenarios, but if it's something that he can't actually help in, he wouldn't want to get dragged down and lose the sports festival for All Might's sake. We see All Might just before the sports festival holding his hand on Deku's shoulder, telling him that he needs to shine to show everyone the brilliance of his power, as well as get Deku out there so that when he takes over as the next symbol of peace, that everyone accepts it. Deku would nod, saying he'll try his best, as the sports festival is now ready to begin. Deku snaps back to attention as we see Midnight then spinning the wheel for the first test, making it the long race that they have to take. Everyone would get in line for the race, and just as it's about to start, Deku would smirk as he has an idea. 3, 2, 1. Bam. Suddenly, a whole row of pine trees would begin to explode from inside of the actual stadium, as Deku's now on top of the tree, as he runs from branch to branch, jumping as he then lands to the ground, in front of everyone who now has to get through this winding forest. Where did the forest come from? People from other classes be saying, as we see Todoroki freezing the entire forest, making a frozen wonderland, as he then was rushing right next to Deku, now making the ground frozen, trying to catch Deku's feet. Deku would leap into the air, but as he touches back onto the ice, he would melt it instantly, using Rewind on this non-object to turn it back to water. Todoroki would be frustrated by this, as he realizes that Deku can nullify his ice by just re-sublimating it back to water, making it ineffective. As Deku and Todoroki are now head and head together, we would hear Bakugo from the back screaming, "Oh no you don't, Deku!" as we see him rushing forward with a large explosion from the back, sending Bakugo flying to the front of the crowd, with Bakugo in front of Todoroki and Deku now. As the three are now racing against each other and time, we then finally make it to the part of the robots, as Deku, Todoroki, and Bakugo both look at the giant robots before them. Deku would then create a humongous redwood as he drops the seed and then expands it at massive speeds, impaling one of the robots as he then climbs it, then before reforming the seed, pulling it into his hand and jumping over the robot. As he's about to land, he would then touch the robot as he then shrinks back down as all the parts of it begin to dismantle themselves as it falls to the ground. Deku would then slide on the piece of metal as he then jumps off of that, giving him a speed boost as he continues running. As Deku runs, he would then touch the ground with the cement on the bottom floor of where they're running, as he then would rewind it, turning it back into liquid cement, as Todoroki and Bakugo are slowed down by this. "That's a dirty trick, Deku," Bakugo would say, as Deku would turn around laughing, saying that everyone is able to use their quirks in this fight, and they're going to try their best to win, right? As Deku continues rushing through the area itself, as he runs and runs and runs, he'd eventually make it to the parkour area, where he has to jump and get across the canyon. Deku would think of an easier way, as he then throws down several sunflower seeds, and then would begin to rewind them forward. As he winds them forward in their time, he'd create a massive bridge, a bridge completely comprised out of the sunflowers themselves, creating this very green as well as lush-looking bridge, almost like it was from some sort of fairy tale. Everyone in the audience is impressed, with everyone oohing and ahhing at Deku's masterful craftsmanship. As Deku runs over the bridge, just as everyone's about to catch up behind him, he would then deactivate the bridge, returning it back down to seeds as he then picks the seeds up on his side and continues running. "Hey, that's not fair!" Todoroki and Bakugo would both be thinking, as they see Deku now rushing away, with everyone having to do the parkour. Todoroki would use his ice to make an ice bridge for himself, copying Deku's idea, with Todoroki and everyone else following behind him. As Todoroki needs to catch up, he can't worry about what's going on behind him right now. Bakugo continues using his explosions to move as fast as possible, with Deku now a good few feet in front of him and Todoroki. The goal is just about to appear, as Deku is running at full speed. I guess it's time to throw down some traps, you would think. As he then pulls out of his pockets, he'd pull out several small plants and pots. What are those? Everyone will be thinking, as we then see Deku throw behind him the carnivorous plants of a fly-eater trap. As the giant plants begin to grow in size, as Deku winds their time faster and faster forward, suddenly we have ginormous plants that can eat people, as they begin to chomp towards Bakugo and Todoroki. That is very terrifying. This is what everyone would be thinking, as they're shocked as Deku continues rushing to the goal, before jumping and making it in first. The carnivorous plants will then dissipate as they go back down to the normal potted size, with Deku running back after the test has been ended and picking up his plants. As he puts them back into his side pockets, everyone will be thinking how much stuff he has in there, as Deku needs a lot of tools in order to actually use his quirk effectively, which he's been using plants as well as other objects that he can control with vast degree. Deku would be the winner, and this would make him be the one with the 10 million points on his head. A lot of people would want to join Deku, however, as Deku is a pretty popular person, as well as he's strong in his own right and can probably defend himself decently well already. Deku would team up, however, with around the same team, as Uraraka would be on his team, as well as everyone else who is from the original team from the original anime and manga. We see Deku now, just as the bell's about to start, everyone's looking at him as they're about to go all for him. Suddenly, as the bell timer starts, Deku would laugh as he throws down all of his redwood seeds that he has, 10 to be precise, all around his team, and then grows them to maximum size. These 60-centimeter giants, with their thick trunks, would actually protect around Deku's team, as Deku basically plans on camping the entire time. As this massive forest grows around his team, they would just sit inside, as above them, the only thing that could reach them would be something from the air, as Todoroki is now preoccupied with other teams who aren't even willing to try and attempt to break through. As Todoroki, as well as some Bakugo, would be gathering points, Deku would be sitting nice and pretty, with his 10 million point headband, as he waits. Deku would decide that he should probably play around with everyone, as he then touches his hand to the ground of the concrete cement below them, as he would then liquefy certain parts of it, as he rewinds it back to before it was actually hardened. We can see Cementos watching as some of the cement begins to liquefy, as he thinks this must be that kid with the rewind ability. As Deku works on rewinding the stage, catching people in traps and locking them back in hard cement, Deku would eventually release them, as he's had his fun. Now that the entire thing was pretty much over, Baku and Todoroki were now after the Redwoods, as they ran towards Deku and his team, with Baku prepared to explode the entire forest, with Todoroki shooting a massive glacier of ice at it. As it hits the tree, we can hear a groaning of wood, as the wood particles inside begin to explode. Alright everyone, Deku would say. Now, Uraraka, do it now. As Uraraka would use her floating quirk on everyone in the team, they would then jump into the air as they kick off the sides of the trees, going higher and higher. As they finally make it to the top in the air, this is when Baku and Todoroki would finally explode the bottom as the trees begin to collapse on each other. Deku would then use his rewind quirk to gather back up his redwood seeds, as he then looks down with them all seeing Deku floating in the air. Deku would then hold up another seed as he shows it to them. Try this one! Coconut Barrage! As Deku would say this, everyone would laugh, before suddenly a ginormous coconut tree would begin to grow out of Deku's hand, as it then begins to shoot up massive amounts of coconuts. What? Baku and Todoroki are getting pelted by these hard-shell coconuts as they shatter into the ground, making a liquid mess of coconut juice. However, they keep rewinding and rewinding back on themselves. What Deku's doing here is he's winding the coconut tree to grow all of the coconuts and then shoot them as fast as possible by rewinding and then winding it back forward and back again. Basically going forward and back very, very fast. This is what he's been training with the past week before the sports festival, which basically gives Deku access to a coconut machine gun with using this tree ability. However, the problem with it is that he needs to be high up, as the tree itself is rather large, so if he used on the ground, he'd be completely immobilized. But here, when they're floating, and it has zero gravity, it's rather easy for Deku to use. Deku pelts everyone below with a massive amount of coconuts, as everyone is completely shocked at how Deku uses quirk. With everyone now giving up as Deku wins with the top place, not even losing his headband, with 10 million points, Team Deku would win. Everyone would cheer as they're now put into the final tournament, with Deku deactivating the coconut tree and everything else would be cleared out. As Deku and everyone eventually falls back down into the arena below, Uraraka would deactivate her zero gravity, as now everyone's made it. Now it's time for the final tournament, as the brackets are being made. The bracket would pretty much be the same, as we see Deku now would be fighting Shinzo. As Deku gets onto the arena, he would also have the advice from Ojiro from before about watching out and not answering any questions. As he walks forward calmly towards Shinzo, Deku would pull a coin out of his pocket as he flicks into the air. Heads or tails? Tails, he would think. Alright. As he doesn't let Shinzo ask him any questions, he would tell Shinzo the first thing, that he would defeat him using only this small coin. Shinzo would ask what he means, as then Deku wouldn't respond. Clever bastard, he would think. Suddenly, Deku would flick the coin, as it goes hurling towards Shinzo. Shinzo would easily move his hat out of the way as it flies off the arena, moving back and asking what that even means. Deku then holds his hand up open, as he then uses rewind on the coin back to its original position. Suddenly, the coin would then fly backwards, as it slams into Shinzo, sending him falling into the arena. That force, he would think, as the coin then lands directly back into Deku's hand. Deku would then throw the coin again, as suddenly it now is moving faster and faster, back and forth as it gains momentum. Deku is using his time ability of rewind in order to rewind the coin's position in the world, as well as gain velocity from it, as the world, the actual Earth itself, is continuously moving, causing the coin to gain more momentum over time, before it becomes so fast it's like a speeding bullet. This coin is moving back and forth across from Shinzo and Deku, as Shinzo is getting pelted from all sides now from ricocheting across the arena, as Deku is now thrown down some other plants and trees in order to make him have ricochet objects he can use. Shinzo is being pelted from all sides, as we see burns and stings beginning to form on his skin that are red from the coin hitting him with its ridges. Shinzo would be pelted from this coin over and over and over and over again, with him not even getting a chance to use his quirk, as suddenly Shinzo would be knocked out from a coin hitting him in the head from behind. The coin would then fly back to Deku's hand, as Deku would deactivate all of his plants and seeds, then taking them and returning them to himself. Shinzo would be knocked out, as Deku then hadn't even walked a single step more from walking to the arena. Deku would walk out, with the rest of Class 1A and the other classes being terrified of what he can do. This is when we see that Monoma would be very, very interested in copying Deku's quirk, as if he had that rewind ability, he could probably do some very interesting things. Deku would get back to the arena, as he then sits back down with Ida and Uraraka saying that was kind of intense. Deku would nod, saying that he has to go all out if he really wants to win, as he thinks back to what All Might had told him. And I need to win, he would think, as he narrows his eyes. Todoroki would be hearing this, as he then thinks that he'll be the one taking the victory. As we see Todoroki now waiting, we would then have our other match begin, with Uraraka and Bakugo going the same as the original. Anyway, this would continue onwards until Deku's next fight, which would be Deku versus Todoroki. Deku and Todoroki get into the arena below, as the two of them stare at each other down. Deku would tell Todoroki that he's not going to let him win. This is when Todoroki would blast ice towards him. Deku would sweep his hand out as the ice instantly melts to water, with everyone in the audience oohing and ahhing at this spectacular show. This is when we would see that Todoroki would begin to shoot more ice at Deku, trying to hit him where he can't rewind the ice before it can hit him. Deku would then sweep his hand, as instead of turning to water, he would sublimate into gas, as suddenly steam would begin to surround the entire area. You know what? I think this might work to my advantage, Deku would think, as he continues making more water and steam until the entire arena is covered. Deku would then suddenly rush towards Todoroki. Todoroki, hearing this, would create a mountain of ice, which Deku would dodge. As Deku rushes forward towards Todoroki, he would then slide onto the bottom half of the floor, as he did not melt the ice on the floor this time. As Deku slides across the ice, he would then rush forward, throwing a punch at Todoroki. Todoroki would try and block this, but his punch would go through the ice wall that was supposed to protect him and directly into Todoroki's jaw, sending Todoroki flying backward as he then hits into the ground area around him. Deku would then remember that he has physical prowess as well. He has one for all, as he decides he's going to use All Might's power to win this fight. As he then activates One For All in his body, he would see the green electricity flowing around him, as Deku would then be charging One For All throughout his entire body, as well as his quirk, which is now giving him more buffs than he would. This power, however, Deku can't fully control yet, as I might have mentioned that Deku has control over his rewind quirk, and he's been using One For All on his quirk, rewind, which is a part of his body, but not a physical, hand or a leg. Deku doesn't really know how strong he is with One For All exactly, as his physical body he hasn't really tested that much. Deku would rush, and as he runs towards Todoroki, he's just gotten up. However, his speed is increased many times. Wow, Deku would think, as he almost slides off the stage before he turns with a kick on Todoroki, sending him into the stage as the ground begins to shatter beneath his body. Endeavor is shocked as Deku is actually wiping the floor of Todoroki, smacking him back and forth, as Todoroki is too shocked to even be able to do anything. He's so fast, he would think, wondering how he's doing it, as Deku would then rush to Todoroki with a handful of seeds, thrusting them into his chest with a palm strike, before growing them out of Todoroki's body, growing all around him and wrapping him in vines. As Todoroki is now completely wrapped up, he would then tell Todoroki there's only one way he can get out of this. He tells him that he has to use his full power, as Deku tells him that Todoroki, there's no way for him to beat him without using both of his quirks, and Deku's going all out against him. Todoroki would then listen to Deku's speech of how it's his quirk, and then would burn through the flames of the vines, as he creates a massive flame. "Try rewinding this then," he would say, as he creates the massive attack of ice and flame that he used against Deku in the original. "I think I will," Deku would say, as he then runs towards Todoroki with his fist pushed back. "Let's do this, Todoroki, Shoto!" As Endeavor would then cry out Shoto's name, Shoto would explode his attack towards Deku. As the attack's just about to hit Deku, Deku would then say, "I'm sorry," as he punches through the flames and ice, rewinding the flames' energy and turning the atoms back into their normal form, as well as the ice sublimating to steam. He would be flying towards Todoroki with electricity covering his body, as he punches Todoroki in the chest, sending Todoroki flying out of bounds and into the stadium wall. Deku would deactivate One For All, as he then feels an immense strain on his body as his stamina falls. Deku would fall to the ground as he's coughing up blood, not realizing that this is the kind of power that All Might was using. "Oh my god," he would think, as he feels sick. Deku would almost fall to his knees, as he then has to rewind his body, as Deku uses his object manipulation to rewind his body before this fight. He would think, as he had never tried using One For All like this throughout his entire body before, except for when he had, tried using One For All back during the test of Aizawa on the ball, which he had to rewind his arm for, which had been completely broken. Deku's body would be in shambles after that, but thanks to his rewind ability, he's fine. Deku would then get back up as he feels his stamina slowly recovering, realizing that his rewind ability isn't always going to be able there to help him if he doesn't have time in a fight to use it. Deku would walk off the stage with Midnight declaring him the winner as the final battle of this tournament would begin. Bakugo versus Deku. The final match of the tournament is about to begin, as Deku had defeated Todoroki using the power of Rewind along with One For All. With his two powers combined, he had been able to overpower another user who had two quirks of his own, Todoroki. With now Deku having surpassed Todoroki's own power, he's now battling his childhood friend, Kacchan. With Deku walking onto the stage, his eyes would be shaking as he's thinking about a way that he can win. Bakugo's quirk allows him to create explosions from his hands, using sweat, he would think, as Deku puzzles on this. Deku would be coming up with several strategies immediately, as he fishes around inside of his belt looking for any different types of seeds as well as other types of materials he can use in this battle. With him already prepared to go, he's now standing there waiting and getting into a fighting position, as Bakugo does the same, looking at Deku as he grits his teeth, saying it's going to be different this time. With Bakugo and Deku now about to fight, the announcer would count down the battle. 3, 2, 1. And just like that, the fight begins. As Deku would then utilize a unique plant that he's been keeping in secret that he thinks will be an excellent use against Kacchan. As Kacchan blasts forward using his overwhelming speed advantage on Deku, Deku would then create the Sandbox Tree. This tree is native to the regions of North and South America, and this is from real life, by the way. The tree has giant spikes that can be used for defense that actually look like spikes from video games, and its flower has pumpkin-shaped fruits that open. It also produces a loud explosive-like sound from the seeds when they pop out of the tree. This plant is rather unique from a different part of the world, as you would know. Anyway, Deku has acquired some very rare seeds in his time to help him with his quirk, as well as he had put it into his support suit with these different utilities he can use. He created the Sandbox Tree as the spikes would burst out of his hand, as he has a ginormous tree now forming around him with spikes. Bakugo pulls himself to a halt, as he has to use all of his power just to pull himself back. Immediately, Deku would then activate it, as he uses more of his rewind power to fast forward the fruits in the tree. Suddenly, they begin to grow as they burst with an explosive roar. This would cause Bakugo to become disorientated, as Deku would then use his next ability that he's been saving. This would be when he uses the Corpse Flower, otherwise known as the Titan Autumn. This flower has a nauseating effect on people that can actually create a nauseous feeling like as if someone's smelling a corpse. Bakugo would then get this whiff as a whole wave of this stench would hit him, causing his vision to become blurry from the intoxicating scent. With Bakugo trying his best not to barf from the smell, Deku would be covering his face with his hand as he's getting ready to use the next one. This is gonna hurt for a while. Sorry I have to do this, Kacchan, he would think. Suddenly, we would see him throw some seeds out onto the arena, as suddenly poison ivy plants would begin to grow from the ground beneath, as Deku rewinds them forward faster and faster. Suddenly, the plants would all wrap around Kacchan, which would have a tight grip on him. Bakugo would have no idea what to do, as he then uses his explosion quirk and destroys all of the plants beneath him, both freeing himself from the attack as well as pushing him into the air out of Deku's range of attack. I suppose I just come to you then, he would say, as Deku would use the power of Rewind to then take another seed out and grow a ginormous water lily. This disc of plant he would then place on the ground as he then hops into it, then pulling it over himself with Bakugo still in the air, confused as to what he's about to do. We would see Deku now suddenly stick his hand out from the top as a ginormous dandelion would begin to grow out of it. By using One For All and charging more energy into the plant than using Rewind, he could grow a plant to its desired stage of existence before then pumping it full of One For All energy, which would basically act as a superfood. With One For All powering this dandelion, it would create a ginormous dandelion head with multiple seeds. The seeds on each dandelion are very similar to helicopters and having different blades of silk. This is when Deku would use the properties of the dandelion's air resistance to pull himself up as long with the water lily as a base, as he goes flying up towards Kacchan with the wind pushing him. This is when he would pull himself out from under the water lily, as he then uses it as a shield against Bakugo's explosion. With Bakugo throwing an explosion towards the lily, telling him he's going to send Deku to the ground, the water lily would actually withstand the explosion, as it's one of the more strong shield-like plants he could access. With Deku charging a bit of One For All into his right pointer finger, he would then flick, causing a burst of air to slap into Kacchan, sending him flying to the ground instead. With Deku landing and then deactivating the energy he'd been putting into the dandelion, it would shrink back to its normal size before he puts the seeds back into his pocket. With Deku considering what his next move should be, he and Bakugo would continue fighting now, as Deku would continue using rare plants from different countries, as well as different types of attacks in general that Bakugo had never seen before. However, this next attack would be something new that Deku is still yet to master. With Bakugo and Deku's last attack, with Deku flicking One For All directly at Bakugo, sending him flying to the ground, Bakugo would have no idea where this monstrous strength is coming from and would be confused, as Deku's ability is Rewind, which allows him to control the time of objects, so he thought. This is when he would realize that Deku planted something on him. "Sorry about this, Kacchan," Deku would say aloud, with Bakugo confused before he realizes, his eyes now looking hollow. Inside of Bakugo's jacket, we could see a piece of the arena, as Deku would then use Rewind to affect the object. As he then pulls the energy that he has put into it towards him, Bakugo would go flying towards Deku as he uses explosions to push the opposite away. Feeling his jacket ripping, he would be overpowered by Rewind's strength as he goes flying towards Deku, who would then throw a right hook directly into Bakugo's face. Bakugo would get sent sprawling onto the ground, as he would now get really pissed off and start grabbing and punching at Deku. The two would be fighting animalistically, which would give Deku an idea. "I'll have to use those," he would think. "I'm going to end this quickly." Deku would quickly reach his hands across himself in an X format and pull two seeds out from each side of his pocket. Bakugo would realize that if he destroyed the seeds that Deku had in his belt, then Deku would have no ammunition to fight him with. As Bakugo would then use an explosion on his belt. "It's over," Deku would say, as Kacchan looks up before he would then pass out. Deku utilized the Gelsium seeds, a flower that can paralyze people. Deku had been planning on using these on villains so that way he could take them out efficiently and quickly, but this would be the best way for him to take Bakugo down without embarrassing him. With Bakugo falling to the ground completely paralyzed and unable to move, he would then try and talk, but he couldn't even feel his mouth moving with how much of the venom from the flower that Deku had used on him. Deku would then deactivate the seeds as he would put them back into the belt, now on the ground with some ash on it, as well as some of the fabric destroyed. He'd pick up all the seeds and put them into the still functional pocket, as he would then tell Kacchan that was a good match. President Mike would be amazed, as well as Aizawa, as he watched Deku during that fight. It took a lot of skill in order to coordinate all those attacks, knowing exactly which plant, which power he was going to use against Bakugo. Bakugo could only feel rage, as he was roaring inside about how Deku used such a cheap trick against him, and that he would have smashed him into the ground. Deku would then tell President Mike that Bakugo won't be getting up for a few hours, as Deku would then be crowned as the winner of the UA Sports Festival. With All Might crowning Deku, he'd be incredibly proud of his protege and his student, young Midoriya. Midoriya has grown so much since he'd first met him, and with One For All, his ability has grown even stronger, with both the ability to control life and objects. Basically, Deku is the master of Rewind at this point. Someone else would be watching the UA Sports Festival this time, and I'll tell you, it's not Shigaraki. We see a Chisaki Kai, the leader of the Yakuza, very interested in this year's sports festival at UA. That boy, he would think, as he recalls a memory of something that he had forgotten from a long time ago. We see a young boy with green hair, as well as a little girl who is around only 2 at the time, while the boy's in around elementary school. We can see that his hair is green and looks kind of like a broccoli, as Chisaki, along with the original Yakuza leader, Eri's grandfather, be standing there laughing as the two are playing together. Eri's grandfather would then pat Izuku's head, saying it's always great to see his grandson, since their family moved so far away from him. Deku would look up at his grandfather laughing, as he continues smiling and playing with his younger cousin Eri. Overhaul would have never seen that boy again, as the boss leader's son had actually moved away from the Yakuza group a long time ago, and had said he didn't want to live that life, this being Deku's father. There's no way, Overhaul would be thinking. Overhaul within sighs, he turns the TV off, saying he's just having an overactive imagination, looking back to see Eri strapped in the chair with blood all over her as she's crying as the experiments to create the quirk nullifying bullets continues. Deku would look away for a second, distracted by something, before then realizing where he is and going back to where his eyes light up again. Something had just happened, but he wouldn't know what it was. Shigaraki, on the other hand, who's also watching the UA Sports Festival, would be very intrigued with Deku and seeing his utilization of his most strong enemy All Might's power one for all. This kid's the real deal, he'd think, the next symbol of peace. This is what Shigaraki would be thinking as he scratches his neck. I'll have to pay him a visit sometime, he would think. With Deku now winning the UA Sports Festival, school would then return to normal for a couple of days. Once Bakugo had become unparalyzed, he would have gotten very angry and would have wanted to kill Deku. Deku, of course, being ready for a fight, would have put his fists up and tell Bakugo he's ready to go anytime, with Aizawa stopping the fight pretty much immediately. With Bakugo now returning to classes and having calmed down a bit after having his defeat at the UA Sports Festival after his strong proclamation, the other classes would have gained a sort of respect for Deku, having watched his incredible fight, as well as having to use such intellect in order to know what he was doing. But eventually, the memory of the UA Sports Festival would become just that, a memory. As now it's time to move on, as the heroes of Class 1A are now about to pick their names. Deku would, of course, go with Deku, as that's what Bakugo had still called him as a child as a nickname, and Uraraka would have supported as well, saying that it fit him really well. Deku would have been pretty pleased with this, as he decides to go with it as his hero name. With the sports festival having ended, now all of the workplaces had been sending in their requests for heroes students, and thousands had been coming in for Deku especially, with such a unique ability as being able to rewind and control life. He essentially had an ultimate healing quirk that he had been able to use as such an effective attack quirk against people with super strong attack quirks. So Deku was basically this prodigy that everyone was going for. With All Might now helping Deku, with telling him that he actually had someone in mind that he wanted Deku to train with personally, saying it'd probably be more beneficial to him. He's still very proud of Deku for getting so many requests, and some from heroes that Deku was really excited to meet too, like Kamui Woods, who was the inspiration from a lot of his fighting style actually. All Might would have written a letter to his old master, Gran Torino, in hopes that he could train Deku, with both of them having very different fighting styles, with Gran Torino entirely relying on his agility, while Deku relies on his intellect and his knowledge. Deku and Gran Torino would make a perfect pair, All Might would think, and if Deku can master One For All's physical abilities, that meant that his physical strength plus rewind would be an incredible asset to him. If Deku doesn't have to worry about his speed, then he can take on opponents much faster than him, as well as utilize rewind quicker. With Deku accepting All Might's proposal of training under Gran Torino would have been accepted the letter that All Might would be sending his own student, the 9th user of One For All, to Gran Torino to seek training. Deku would arrive by train very quickly during the workplace study, as now he would then head to the building that was told to him by All Might. As he walks in, he would see Gran Torino on the ground covered in blood. Instead of the original timeline where Deku freaks out, this Deku would rush over immediately, as he is about to use rewind on the old man. Gran Torino would quickly get up as he doesn't want to get reversed back to the age of a baby, as he then tells Deku that he's fine, he was just playing a joke, as he'd fall into some ketchup, with him sweating, as Deku has now had his hand glowing, along with his horn symbolizing that he had rewind on his head, having now shrunken back to its original size, as he was disappointed by this. He told Gran Torino and asked if he was really okay, with Gran Torino and Deku having a funny relationship at the start. Gran Torino would challenge Deku to fight him, with now Gran Torino telling Deku that he knows that his specialty is outdoors, but as he then kicks off the ground using his air jet to fly around the room and now kick at Deku. You won't always have the luxury of being outside when you're fighting. Deku would smile as he says he knows that, as he then pulls out two seeds, but just as he's about to use them though, Gran Torino kicks Deku in the face. Deku would then be shocked as he gets sent flying under the couch, now peeking out from under it as Gran Torino is flying around like a gnat. How am I supposed to get out of this, he would think. Wait a minute, he would realize, as he notices the messed up furniture and everything Gran Torino's caused in his own house. Let's use some rewind, he'd think, as he then jumps out and then slaps one of the chairs, using rewind's ability to put physical objects back in their place before motion. Suddenly the entire room would begin moving around, as Gran Torino would get whacked by the objects that he himself had kicked off the walls and the floor with his jumping. Well, that's ironic, he'd think, as Deku would then say he's got him, with throwing a punch towards him. Gran Torino would then easily dodge this as he then tells Deku to stop, asking if Deku even knows that he has one for all to begin with. Deku would then be questioning what he means, with Gran Torino saying that he's relying on his own quirk too much. He would tell Deku, in this version actually, that he was actually doing the opposite of what the original Deku's mistake had been. He's been treating One For All like it was a side gig, like something that he just happened to have along with Rewind. Gran Torino would point towards Deku and tell him that he has to use One For All more, and that he's never going to master this power if he barely uses it. Deku would be shocked as he realizes that he really hadn't been using it, and that with Rewind he didn't even have to worry about the risk on his body like most other people would. With Deku saying he'll try his best, Gran Torino would smile, telling him that he needs to focus on powering One For All throughout his entire body. Similarly to how Deku would move energy from the horn that powers up, along with his Rewind ability that whenever he uses it, and the energy he can feel whenever he pushes into his hand or any seed or any plant, that same energy is similar to what One For All is, and if he could find the way to combine the two, then it might be easier for him to control it. Deku would close his eyes as he thinks of two energies within inside of him. One golden and shining, with many different colors mixed in being One For All, and one green and pure, just like himself, a power that was all his own. He would take the two and begin to combine them as he feels the colors mixing together until the bright gold of All Might as well as Deku's power itself would begin to mix into this nice light green. Deku would open his eyes as he sees sparks flying across his body for a mere instant before he pulls himself out of it, thinking that's way too difficult. He would nod, saying he's going to try again, as he powers One For All into only his right arm. Throwing a punch at Gran Torino this time, Gran Torino would feel the smack of wind as he gets sent flying into his wall. Deku would scream in pain as he feels the pain across his right arm searing, as blood and bruises begin to form along it. I'll take care of that, he'd think, as he uses his left arm, slamming into his right, charging Rewind into it to a few seconds beforehand. There we go, he'd say, as he feels his arm back to normal. That sure hurts though, he'd think, as he grits his teeth, thinking about how much pain that was. Gran Torino would tell him that he has to figure out a way to circumvent that, and that he just used all of One For All in his arm, didn't he? Deku would nod, saying isn't that how he's supposed to do it? Unlike One For All, Rewind, the power that Deku is used to using, doesn't have percentages. When he activates Rewind, he sees an image in his mind of a clock that he turns the hands back on or forward on. It's not like a percentage that he turns up to make it stronger or weaker. The only time he's ever done something like that was at the sports festival when he took One For All and combined it, like, he'd realize, I have to make them one machine. With now the clock that Rewind is attached to instead of being plugged into the wall, Deku would imagine it having batteries in the back. These batteries would have different percents of power, and this would be One For All. If I charge more power and use the batteries more, then I can power up the clock and it uses more energy, he would think, as he feels himself powering up as his horn begins to elongate, as electricity would then spark over his body again. Green lightning would cover him as he feels his muscles tightening, as Deku would grit his teeth, looking down, realizing, I did it, as he sees One For All is powered up throughout his entire body. He would fall out of it again, with Gran Torino telling him that's enough for today, with Deku smiling and thanking Gran Torino for everything he's learned from him so far. Gran Torino would tell Deku they have a lot of work to do, and also he has to get a new microwave. Before he goes out to go get that new microwave though, Deku would tell him it's no problem at all, as he then just simply taps the microwave with his hand as he uses Rewind to fix the physical object, as the metal begins to contort and then fix before it's like nothing ever happened and the room is back to its normal self. Wow, you must be a real help during spring cleaning, Gran Torino would think, as Deku would laugh, thinking that's a weird use of his powers. With Deku then telling Gran Torino he's going to work extra hard, Gran Torino would give him a thumbs up before saying he's still going out to get taiyaki, as he wants some dessert. Deku would begin training in the back alley behind Gran Torino's building, as he begins working on trying to use One For All, as well as Rewind together. Damn it! One more time! Gran Torino would laugh, as he then sees Deku chases him around the room, bouncing around, just like an Energizer bunny, as Deku visualizes in his head the image that he's been practicing for almost a week on how to master. Merely only 5 days ago, Deku would begin grasping the power of what he's called full cowling, One For All. And it's been much tougher than he actually would have realized, with him having to charge One For All throughout his entire body and not just using his quirk like he'd been using before. It's much more difficult than he would have imagined. We see as he accesses One For All that his horn on his head grows larger as it darkens in color to a darker shade of green, similar to his hair color. We see Deku powering up his entire body as he tells Gran Torino he's going to catch him, with him jumping as Gran Torino barely dives out of the way, telling Deku he's come far over the past week, saying that they'll be going on their first training mission out in the city, Hosu City to be precise. Deku would sit up and ask, "Are you sure? Are we really going to Hosu?" He'd think, as Deku would then remember that that's where Ida was going. If Ida's in Hosu City, then maybe I'll be able to see how he's doing. With Deku recalling near the end of the last sports festival. With Deku as he says goodbye to Ida at the train station, Ida would have a dark tone in his eyes, as we see a shade in them that Deku hadn't ever seen before. "Hey, Ida, are you okay?" Ida would reply as he then would tell Deku that he's perfectly fine, with Deku not believing a word of it. But Deku was a bad friend. He didn't confront Ida about it sooner, and this will be something that Deku would regret later on. Now, on that day, we see Deku and now Gran Torino on the train as they're boarding and heading over towards Hosu City to go and do some hero patrols, which would be Deku's first that he's ever done. Deku would practically be jumping up and down of how ecstatic he was about going on this hero patrol, this being his first ever real job as a hero. He would have now gotten the handle on One For All full cowling with Rewind a little bit more, and could now access around 5% of One For All's power if he uses his entire body with his quirk. Now some of you might be wondering, Weeb, why is it more difficult for him to use One For All and his quirk? Shouldn't it be easier because, you know, with him having a handle on a quirk and everything, he should be able to understand how quirks work and know that it's part of his body so he could be able to access more percentage of One For All? And to that I would say, yes, it should work like that. But Rewind is such a complex quirk, especially with One For All adding his new boosted power where he can control not living objects. As we all saw in Season 4 of My Hero Academia, Eri at her age could barely at all not even control her quirk at the least. And Deku's been training most of his life to master his quirk, and Rewind is incredibly powerful. So it took him most of his life to use Rewind to the degree that he can. So adding One For All, which boosts the power, basically throws off his control. So that's why I'm saying it's much more difficult for him to control One For All as well as Rewind. So, back to the video, however. As the train's going along, we suddenly hear a crash. As almost like a whisper, the lights all shut off in the train compartments. We see a crash as metal creaks, and suddenly the train would be ripped off as some of the tracks are pushed off. Deku would ask Gran Torino what's going on, when Gran Torino would say, "Get out of the way." Suddenly there'd be a Nomu there, who's about to hop into the train and start attacking civilians. Gran Torino would tackle the beast, the Nomu, as he goes flying out of the train, telling Deku to get out and find the nearest hero agency to report the Nomu sighting. Deku would scream, "Gran Torino!" as Torino goes flying out using his quirk to push himself and the Nomu away from the civilians. Deku would then stand up as he tells everyone to be calm, with him saying he'll fix the train immediately. As everyone clears out of the way, Deku would run over to the side of the wall as he uses Rewind. Alright, here we go. Electricity of green and dark green colors would then burst off his horn as he uses One For All, and combined with Rewind would then rewind the train back to a few seconds before the Nomu attacked it. As the train would then move itself automatically back onto the train tracks, everyone would cheer as the civilians thank Deku for his help. Deku would blush as he's kinda shy with everyone cheering him on, as he would then say it's not a big deal and then he's just a hero in training, with everyone saying he's gonna go far. After Deku would get out of the thankful crowd, he would then tell everyone to stay safe as he would then run off into Hosu City, with him chasing after where he saw Gran Torino going. This would be when a great fire would begin to ensue in the city, as the other Nomus have now arrived, with Stain, the killer Stain, only a few hours before having been approached by the League of Villains, Shigaraki and Kurogiri. Back to that conversation, we see Stain standing there in the shadows, as we now see Kurogiri having finally found him, as he had brought him to the League of Villains hideout, where Shigaraki would talk with him. This? So you're supposed to be the famous killer Stain, the hero killer, huh? You don't look so intimidating to me, Shigaraki would say, as he then walked closer, his hand out, as he feels himself wanting to get over this conversation quickly and be done with it. As he's about to take his hand and touch Stain, Stain would quickly pull a knife out as he slashes, barely cutting one of Shigaraki's fingers. This would cause Shigaraki to lash out as he begins to attack Stain. Stain, who would be on his toes, however, would pull another knife out, as the two are about to fight. Kurogiri would stop this fight as he then tells Stain that he's going to put him back in Hosu City and take him back to where he was when he found him. Stain would now successfully calm down, with Kurogiri holding Shigaraki back. Stain would head back to Hosu, where he would then plan his next attack to continue his journey on killing all untrue heroes, as he would call it. Deku, on the other hand, would be now running through the city as he's looking for more people he can save from the Nomu's attack, with Shigaraki a few hours later deciding that he didn't want Stain on his team. He was too sporadic. He wasn't a true villain. At least that's what he would say, as he would release the Nomus to create a wreckage of the city, merely to prove to himself that he has the power far greater than Stain over the world. But unlike Shigaraki, Stain would be on the move. The hunt. As Stain's now be using the chaos to his advantage, as he's trying to hunt down a hero that he can treat as his prey. This is when he would find Native, of course, with us then seeing Ida scanning around the alleyways, looking as he had looked and researched into Stain's past killings, as he's now finding where Stain's next strike will be. Deku would be watching as he looks down at his phone, hoping to find a signal from anyone as he's running towards the flames. This would be when he would break off from the rest of the group of the other heroes that had assembled and were heading towards the chaos, and he would then go down the back alleyways, utilizing One For All full cowling to boost his speed and agility, as he would climb up the wall and now be jumping along buildings looking down. Suddenly he would see Stain, as that's what Deku would predict would happen, with Ida and him and everyone else eventually finding out in the news what happened to Ingenium after Stain's attack. Ida would be out for blood, but so would Stain. We see Ida now fighting against Stain and losing, as Stain's much more adept at combat and has more experience than Ida has. Even though Ida has a speed advantage, it wouldn't last for long, as one cut, and that was the end, as Stain would then lick the blood and paralyze Ida using his quirk. Suddenly, as he's about to finish off Ida with the blade, we get a punch to Stain's face at full power, as Stain's already lost the fight, and he doesn't even know it. We see Deku standing there as he yells at Stain, "I won't let you hurt my friends!" He would tell Stain this as he then charges up with electricity now charging over his entire body, his horn glowing as he has Rewind and One For All in perfect sync. One For All. Full cowling! Stain's eyes couldn't even keep up with the speed of Deku's body, as Deku throws a flying kick directly at Stain's head. Stain would barely block it as he has to use all of his superhuman senses in order to avoid these attacks. Deku would now begin to use Rewind as well. Deku would tell Stain and warn him that if Stain couldn't stay out of Deku's range, then the fight would be over before it could even begin. Deku would suddenly use a kick of speed as he flies towards Stain, who would barely be able to, and not even get out of the way. This would already be the end of the fight. Yeah, I'm sorry to be anticlimactic, but Deku's Rewind ability is pretty broken if he uses it like this. And Deku isn't messing around, as Stain actually almost killed Native and his friend Ida, so he'd just take Stain out immediately, with Deku utilizing Rewind on Stain's body and rewinding Stain back to a toddler. Stain would realize what's going on as he's now in a toddler body, and his muscles that he'd been working years on developing were now gone. Well, that's it, Deku would say as he then brushes himself off. He was actually pretty fast, Deku would think in his head, as Stain had been able to avoid most of his attacks, but Deku was just way too strong of an opponent. As long as Deku can touch someone in time, even once, and he has Rewind activated, he can rewind their bodies to an age before they can fight. Deku's quirk is pretty OP when it comes to fighting villains, and I'm not going to nerf it in this video just because of the fight's sake, because in reality he probably would have done this not to protect Stain and also the other heroes, Ida and Native. Deku would then go heal Ida and Native by using Rewind on their bodies to the point before Stain attacked them, with them instantly being healed as the two would thank Deku, with Ida now in tears, telling him that he didn't want Midoriya to come save him. Deku would say there's nothing wrong in helping his friends, but Ida would be pretty pissed off at this point since he didn't even get that final kick, and he's not about to curb stomp a toddler, so, you know, that's not happening. Stain's literally just wrapped up in his scarf like a prison, and he can't escape, so he's just crying now because he's like 4 or 5 at this point, with Deku having basically dispatched him. Deku would tell Stain that after they take him to prison, Deku will rewind him back to his age before his fight with Deku. Suddenly Todoroki would come running around the corner. He would see Ida, a hero, as well as Deku, Midoriya, standing there. "What happened?" Todoroki would ask, with Todoroki running over to the group and asking what happened if there was something that went wrong, since he had thought that Midoriya had been in trouble, so he'd broken off from Endeavor and the other heroes who were in Hosu. Midoriya would be happy to see Todoroki, as he would tell him that they need to go and help Gran Torino and the other heroes fight the Nomus. Todoroki and then Deku would ask Ida if he can fight, with Ida nodding, saying after Deku healed him he was all set. They would take Stain and wrap him up somewhere so that way he wouldn't be in harm's way, with Stain now in tears. This would actually have a big impact on the world of My Hero Academia, in the fact that because Stain didn't have his effect with him dying and actually intimidating the heroes, he wouldn't have inspired a new generation of villains like he did originally. But anyway, Back to the story, we see Deku, Todoroki, and Ida heading over to where the Nomus are, with Endeavor as well as the other heroes taking care of them. Deku could easily use One For All combined with Rewind to rewind the Nomus back to people before they had their quirks, which made Deku basically the perfect weapon against All For One's Nomus, with All For One still not yet aware of this threat. Deku, Todoroki, and Ida would be thanked for their assistance, and that's when they would take the heroes over to show them the killer Stain. Stain would be in a small child's body at this point, and they wouldn't believe that it was Stain until Deku would tell them to watch this. Deku's horn would begin to glow, so he then would take his hand and touch Stain before closing his eyes and then re-aging Stain back to before he had used a rewind on him. Stain would suddenly fall to the ground in a heap as he tries to get up and try and fight back, but before he could do anything, all the heroes were around him and putting him in handcuffs. Stain would be cursing as he sees the flying Nomu now coming down to try and swoop on Deku. Stain would force himself out of the hero's crowd as he would jump out and save Deku from the flying Nomu just as it grabs onto him, using his teeth and biting onto the Nomu's wing and pulling it to the ground. As Deku would be freed, he would have been caught off guard as he runs over and grabs the Nomu before deactivating the Nomu and returning it back to its human form. Stain's pure bloodlust would have terrified the heroes, and they would have taken him immediately back into custody and asking if Deku was alright. Midoriya would nod, as Gran Torino would be thankful that his now apprentice had actually succeeded in helping the city. Endeavor would be credited for taking Stain down, just like he would have in the original, and the three of them would have been chewed out, but this time no one would have gotten hurt, since Deku's Rewind quirk is versatile enough to be used as a healing quirk, as well as an offensive quirk, with Deku most likely going to be one of the hero's greatest weapons against the villains in the near future. Deku, Ida, and Todoroki would then go back and finish their work studies as they already would have had, with Gran Torino being proud of Deku and telling him that as long as he keeps working on full cowling, he'll eventually be able to use 100% of One For All. Deku would head back to UA along with the rest of the students who'd all learned something over their break from school, while they'd been out on the job at their hero work studies. With Deku now heading back to the class and walking through the door of Class 1A, everyone would be excited to see him, especially, well, everyone except really Bakugo. Everyone said that they saw the fights with the Nomus happening on TV, and Deku totally saved the day, with him already building his reputation as one of the heroes that saved a ton of damage from Hosu City, as after the Nomus attack, Deku used Rewind on all the buildings, making basically no damage. Deku's quirk would actually be recognized in a hero magazine covering different heroes, their quirks and such, covering Deku, in fact, as a new rookie in their section about potential heroes in the future, which would include regular stars like Mirio and the Big Three from UA, as well as other hero schools. Midoriya would have a small section about the Hosu City incident and how useful his quirk was for revitalizing the city as well as saving people with its healing powers. Everyone would be rather impressed, but this actual news that Deku would be getting would be a turn for the worse, as we now see Kai and Shisekai watching the tapes of Deku saving the Nomus and rewinding the city. That's definitely it, he would say. As we see a door open, we see Overhaul walk into the metal room, with Eri now chained up against a wall with injuries everywhere. Overhaul would use his quirk Overhaul on her legs, which had been previously cut off so she couldn't try and run away, with the bleeding having been stopped. Eri would be in immense pain as she feels tears coming down her face, with her having already lost the ability to smile and having gone through an immeasurable amounts of torture from the Yakuza, who had already begun using her body in experiments to create rewinding bullets to erase quirks. He would grab Eri by the hair and pull her out into the main room, with her screaming and crying, him telling her to shut up. As he pulls and throws Eri onto the couch, he would then play the tape and ask, "Do you recognize this boy?" Eri would have seen Deku now for the first time since she was very, very young, and she would only have a faint memory of her playing with her cousin at her aunt's house before their grandpa had disappeared, and Izuku had disappeared as well. Eri would be trying to keep quiet. He says, "No, I don't know who that guy is." Eri would be mumbling. As Overhaul would look into her eyes, he would then narrow them as he then says that she's lying to him. Eri would be dragged back into that room as we hear screams coming from the other side of that door. Back to the present, we see Izuku Midoriya now settling back comfortably into the life at UA. Today would be the day at school when they would announce that the heroes at the school, the teachers, would be having an exam for the students, and the teams would be decided. Each of you will be assigned a hero, and you have to escape through the gate, both of you together, or fight and defeat the hero that you'll be fighting. Aizawa would tell the students when they'd be notified about when their battle would take place, as well as the test and who they'd be facing. Finally, the day would come. Deku would walk into class as everyone's crowded around the board, with everyone looking back in shock at him, with Bakugo sitting in his chair, his hair covering his eyes. As Deku would look on the board and see that he and Bakugo, Kacchan, would be fighting All Might. Deku would look over at Bakugo as Bakugo would look at him dead in the eyes. "Are you ready for this, Deku?" Bakugo would say, with the two being more mutual since they both were equally in power as children. Bakugo would still have a strong rivalry with Deku, but at least the two of them could work together. In fact, this time, instead of the reason of them being paired together because they had no teamwork, it was because the teamwork of them two combined might be enough to help fight against All Might. Deku would nod, with Bakugo telling him that they're going to fight All Might and beat him. The two of them aren't chickening out of this fight, right? Bakugo would look as Deku would nod, the two of them giving each other a fist bump, with Deku saying he'll try his best. Bakugo would then sigh as he then tells Deku that your best isn't even going to be good enough compared to mine, as he would smile telling him he's going to destroy All Might, with Bakugo shaking a little. Deku would pat Bakugo on the back as he sits down at his desk, telling him that he's nervous too, as the day would shortly arrive, with the week between the exams slowly passing for them. Bakugo and Deku would be one of the last people to participate, with the other students doing theirs and basically having the same results they would have had in the original. Deku and Bakugo would enter, as All Might would have heavy weights on him, with Bakugo and Deku getting ready to begin. As the alarm would set, the two would run off into the city to try and find All Might. Deku and Bakugo run inside of the area, this huge city block that was set to be their area of battle against their teacher, All Might. This time, instead of Deku thinking that he can't beat All Might, he and Bakugo are devising a plan where they both can win together. They're planning on taking All Might down. Deku, who wants to use his power to show and prove to All Might that he can succeed as his next successor, doesn't want to shy away. He wants to show All Might that he is strong, and he can be stronger than him if he really tries. Deku's shaking inside, as he knows how powerful All Might is, after seeing All Might's numerous feats and having watched him for years. Deku would tell Bakugo his plan, with Bakugo begrudgingly listening to Deku, since in this timeline, he actually respects Deku, instead of what he had originally, with Bakugo looking down on him. Since Deku was born with a powerful quirk just like Bakugo, the two had more in common, and Bakugo was less of a jerk to him. So anyway, Bakugo would consider the idea before telling Deku that he still wants to go and smash him by himself, telling Deku to hang back and they'll do this one-on-one. Deku would say that it's unlikely they can win like that, but he'll give Bakugo the shot, since if he really wants to do that, they can do that. Deku would climb up into the building, as he uses One For All and activates One For All across his entire body. As he jumps up into the building, he would then hide in it, telling Bakugo to go and meet up with All Might and we'll see what happens. Bakugo would laugh as he tells Deku just to watch, and then walk out of the gate with him after he beats All Might. With a sudden flash and a burst of a wave of a sonic boom, Bakugo would be using his explosions to propel himself through the air, as he goes closer and closer towards the heart of the fake city. As Bakugo is nearing it, suddenly we can hear something. As suddenly a wave of wind pressure comes raging against the city as all the windows shatter in the buildings, as All Might threw the first punch. Bakugo gets blasted by this wind as he gets forced back, slamming into a wall. Bakugo would then get him and pull himself up, as Deku is still watching from inside the building, amazed at All Might's power, even with these weights on. Just as All Might's looking around wondering where Midoriya is, Bakugo would now go on the assault as he continues throwing explosions at All Might, with him doing nothing. All Might would grab Bakugo's head as he throws him around, him slamming into a building, with Bakugo now coughing as spit comes flying from his mouth. Bakugo would look towards where he last saw Deku, as in Bakugo's eyes Deku knows this is a signal, that Bakugo is almost out. I guess it's time, Deku would think, as the crashed building's windows would begin to suddenly recede. There he is, All Might would be thinking. As all the windows in the city, the cracked glass would begin to rise, as we see electricity sparking across the glass. Suddenly a crash can be heard as Deku jumps through one of the recently fixed windows as he begins landing towards the city street below. All Might, he'd be thinking, I'm going to prove to you that I can, as he pulls back his fist. Do this! Combining Rewind and One For All, Deku would use the most broken ability he can at this point, quite literally, as Deku would charge 100% of One For All into this punch. As he throws the punch, a blast of wind pressure would come flying at All Might, sending him flying as he slams into a metal pole. Deku would fall to the ground as he uses One For All just as he's about to land on his feet to catch himself on the ground. Just as he looks down, his right arm is completely shattered, black and bruised. Bakugo would call him he's an idiot, as Deku would laugh as he holds his left hand, and then as he takes it from his shoulder down to his right hand, suddenly the entire arm would be healed from Rewind. I just rewind my body back to a few seconds before I throw the blow, he would say. Bakugo remembered how Deku had originally thrown the ball, that when they were taking the test from Aizawa, how he had done a similar thing. It's less efficient, Deku would say, as he says it takes a lot of his stamina and that he can't keep using Rewind forever. But at least his body's physically healed, he would say, as he checks his right arm, feeling it back to normal. I can throw around maybe 10 of those punches before I can't use Rewind anymore. And once that happens, you'll be able to go down too. Anyway, come here. Bakugo would hobble over to Deku as he then touches Bakugo, with a yellow and green electric lights beginning to cover Bakugo as his body reverts back to before All Might had slammed him. Nice, Bakugo would say. Alright, let's go get him. He should be up now. Suddenly, All Might would appear behind the two of them as he brings his knee up, kneeing Midoriya in the head. Ugh! Gotta get rid of the healer first, All Might would be thinking. As Midoriya comes crashing into the side of a wall, he would have used One for All just in time to cushion the blow. Damn, that really hurt, he would say. He would look back as he sees All Might now fighting against Baku again. This time we'll take him together, he'd say, as Deku would charge up. All Might, if I get one touch on you, I can revert you back to a baby, you know. This would be what he would say. That is, if you can touch me, young Midoriya, All Might would comment, as he's way faster than Deku had anticipated. All of the Class 1A students are watching the fight, and everyone, including the teachers, are amazed at Deku's utility in combat, as he had just seen him get slammed into a wall and had just fixed himself instantaneously. That might be the fastest recovery hero, well, ever, Aizawa would be thinking. Deku would then go running towards All Might as he charges One for All into his whole body. One for all, feel the calling. As electricity charges over his body, he's now at around 7-8%, since Deku's body can handle more. He could actually go higher if he wanted to, around 20% at this point in time, which is very high for full cowling, by the way, since 20% is around where the overhaul arc was. But you guys have to remember that because he has a quirk, his body is naturally more adept at handling One for All, or any quirk, to be honest, more than a human who doesn't have a quirk would. Deku and Bakugo, we have a small flashback to before the entire fight started. Deku would ask Bakugo if he wants him to use his Rewind to revert All Might back to a baby. If he can get one touch on All Might, the fight ends. Bakugo would shake his head, telling him that that's way too broken, and that it basically nullifies the fight to begin with. He would then pound his fist together as an explosion hits over it. He then tells Deku he wants to fight him fair and square, and if Deku can't handle that, then he can leave the gate by himself. Deku would sigh as he tells Baku he wasn't going to do that. He just wanted to ask if it was an option that Baku would be okay with. Bakugo would sigh as he tells Deku he wants to fight him, and Deku would agree. Back to the present, we see Deku throwing a punch of full cowling, around now 8%, since he wants to test this ability and his control, more importantly. As he throws a punch towards All Might would slap it away with his hand. He says that's too weak. Deku would then bring up his left leg as he throws a kick towards All Might's head. All Might would barely dodge this as Bakugo then blasts him in the gut of an explosion. Bakugo and Deku's teamwork was unexpected by All Might, since the two of them were famous for fighting each other. He didn't know that the two of them were actually good friends as children. It's just that they had a strong rivalry. Bakugo and Midoriya would give each other a fist bump, as Midoriya says that he's ready right now. Bakugo would agree as he says they're ready for that attack. Bakugo would pull out one of his gauntlets as he tells Deku to get ready. Alright, Deku would put two hands on each side of the gauntlet as he charges up Rewind, telling him to go. Bakugo would send the blast as Deku braces himself for the explosion. As All Might gets hit by this huge blast, All Might would be blocking it. That's not nearly powerful enough to... What? Suddenly a second blast would go, and a third, a fourth, a fifth. Deku is using Rewind, his physical ability of Rewind, using Enhanced One for All Rewind, in order to control the explosion's time to when it hits and reverting it back in time before it even started. So Deku can infinitely restock Bakugo's shells with his Rewind ability, because he's simply taking the effect of the explosion and reverting it back to the sweat of the nitroglycerin before the effect of the explosion occurred. And Bakugo is using this to their full advantage, as they're using the time ability of Rewind plus Bakugo's pure power, and it's actually working. All Might's getting whittled down slowly, but the destruction to the city is definitely not worth it, as several buildings are now about to collapse from the explosions. It's become like a nuclear wasteland, and All Might's arms are singed with burn marks. Deku would say that's enough as he tells Bakugo they're ready. Bakugo and Deku would blast off, as Bakugo uses explosions to slam against the walls. He then kicks downwards, heading an axe kick towards All Might's head. Deku on the other hand would charge straight forward as he uses his speed and boosts up One For All full Cowling to 15%. As the speed advantage boost would cause him to go flying faster towards All Might, he'd throw a kick towards All Might. As All Might blocks Midoriya's kick, he then sees Bakugo coming in as he blocks Bakugo's explosion. He grabs Bakugo's arm and Deku's leg as he throws them as hard as he can away from him towards the end of the gates. Bakugo and Deku would get tangled up in each other as they get rolled out of the gates and actually pass the exam. Oops, All Might would be thinking, as he didn't even mean to do that when he threw them. It just so happened that that's where they went. Bakugo and Midoriya would be arguing as they pull themselves out of each other's limbs and get up off the ground, with Deku brushing himself off and saying that that was intense. Deku would then walk back into the stadium as he then says he'll fix it up for them, instead of costing the school more money. He quickly would use Rewind and rewind all of the buildings and explosions and flames back to their original form, back to nothing, as the city looks like it was barely ever even touched to begin with. All Might would still be impressed with Deku's ability, but as he then is done, Deku would fall to the ground using all of his stamina that he had. Rewind itself has a few limitations that I like to go over. With Deku's enhanced Rewind, he has several abilities that Eri does not. With Eri being able to control that over living things, Deku with One For All boosting his quirk, which he can also control Rewind over living things to a perfect degree. Deku can now control unliving things, objects, which I've said before in previous parts. However, this imperfect version of Rewind, this addition to it, is something that Deku hadn't necessarily mastered to the degree he had his original quirk. And so when he uses it, it uses much more stamina than the original Rewind does. That's why he can heal himself multiple times easier than fix a city multiple times easier. And at least for now. Deku knows about this weakness, but it hasn't come in that bad since he's mostly had to use Rewind on himself or other people's bodies. Anyhow, Deku himself and Bakugo would pass, with everyone excited at that battle, telling them that was awesome. Seeing All Might go that far against them, those two are going to be super strong heroes. Aizawa and the rest of the pro heroes would be impressed with Deku's thinking, as he had fixed the city right after the destruction had taken place. His quirk would be one of the most beneficial ever to the media, as all the destruction that heroes cause can be fixed easily now, with no cost to taxpayers. Both Bakugo and Deku would not be very satisfied with this result, as they never really got to find out who would have won in a fight. So the two of them were kind of disappointed, but they did pass, so they would be going on to go to the summer camp, the summer training camp. With the rest of the teams participating pretty much the same as normal, and everyone passing who passed and those who failed, failed. After many, many weeks with everyone relaxing and taking their time off, for granted mostly, the summer training camp arc would begin, as all of them are sent over to UA to go on the bus to head over towards their training camp for the summer. As Deku's excited to see what's going to happen, Bakugo and the rest of them would all be waiting in anticipation as well. As everyone's waiting, we would see as the forest comes into view as they'd stop. Everyone would get off the bus as we meet the wild pussycats who would come to greet them. With Deku excited, he then starts spewing off hero knowledge about them, with everyone pretty much expecting this. Pixie Bob would use the ground, as she then forces all of the students to get pushed over the edge and then run through the forest to get to the training camp as fast as possible. However, what she wasn't expecting is Deku's reaction time. As the ground begins to move, Deku would suddenly slam his hand to the ground, as he's about to use Rewind on the ground to fix it so that everyone doesn't fall off the edge. Aizawa would suddenly use his quirk nullification, as he stares at Deku with Deku realizing what's going on, as he stops. Rewind would be deactivated as they all fall off the edge, with now it continuing. Pixie Bob would be confused how he actually stopped her quirk control, with her asking Aizawa if that kid has some sort of anti-quirk ability, with Aizawa then explaining the situation, and all the Pixie Bobs being impressed. As Deku would fall to the floor below, everyone asked what happened, with Deku saying that Aizawa-sensei had taken his quirk away. With Deku now flexing his hand, feeling that his quirk controls come back, he tells all of them they need to get to the forest as fast as possible. Deku be thinking at this time he's not fighting against All Might, so he can use all of his other abilities now too. Deku reaches into his side pockets of his belt as he then pull out a large flower, or a large plant seed. What's that, everyone be asking, as Deku put it on the ground. Suddenly a humongous tree, a redwood, would sprout underneath him as he gets sent flying into the air on the top of it, with some students on the leaves having already jumped off. As Deku's crouching on the top of the tree looking around for the best area to go, Deku would jump off as he deactivates Rewind and grabs the seed from the air. As Deku's now falling towards the ground, he would use his One For All ability. As he uses One For All, he catches himself on a tree and continues jumping from tree to tree limb. Deku would think that if he had used his plants and Rewind during the fight against All Might, he probably could have won. But he and Baku had said they wanted to fight him one-on-one and they wanted to test their combat skills. And Deku wanted to test his power with One For All. So he'll just have to do it next time, he'd say as he smiles. Anyhow, Deku would keep going as he uses plants to deactivate all of Pixie Bob's abilities that she's been using, creating golems to fight him, and everyone else who's lagging behind him. With Deku using Rewind, Todoroki as well as Baku would begin using their quirks to get through the forest quicker as well, noticing his speed gap in front of them. This is when Deku decided to kick it up a notch as he goes to his maximum full cowling limit, 25%. As suddenly a speed boost would hit him, he's going flying through the trees faster and faster, easily kicking off as he looks like a blur of green. As Deku finally makes it to the campsite first, he would land as he sees Koda as well as the Pixie Bobs and Aizawa who had arrived by now. With them impressed at Deku's runtime, he'd be fairly ahead of all the others, with him making in time to have a little break and sit down. This would be when he'd be introduce himself to Koda, as well as meet all the Pixie Bombs properly. As the rest of the students arrive, we now switch our perspective to a shadowy figure with a bird-like beak covering his mouth, as he holds binoculars to his eyes, zooming in on Deku's horn and down onto Deku's face. That's him. Overhaul, Kai Chisaki would be saying, as we see Overhaul as well as his several Yakuza accomplices sitting on the mountain ridge watching as the students of UA have made it to the summer training camp. Behind Overhaul, we see standing there the League of Villains Vanguard squad, who had been sent as well from the League of Villains, who had no idea any other groups would be coming here, as the two of them were already disputing over who they were there for. All of them on the villain side were saying they were there for a kid named Bakugo, and Overhaul said that was fine. They were after Midoriya. As both groups would split their separate ways, saying not to get in each other's way, Kai Chisaki would be keeping an eye on Deku. He might even have more power with Rewind than Eri, he'd be saying as he's smiling underneath. I can't believe I missed such a precious treasure. I'll make sure to reclaim it quickly, he'd think, as himself and the other Yakuza members would dive into the forest so they could get into their plan of action, with a few days before it actually starts coming. Deku would have no idea, as the two groups had invaded the forest area and were waiting patiently. And so for the next 2 days, the villain teams, being the Vanguard squad and the Yakuza squad, would both be lying in wait for their respective targets, watching them from afar. Overhaul would be rather interested in Deku, seeing his unique abilities that he's witnessing through his training from Rewind. So, if he can use Rewind on not just living things, but physical objects as well, he can even rewind forward and backward in positioning. His control over the quirk is leagues and bounds ahead of Eri's. If I can just get him, then I'll be able to use both physical rewind and bodily rewind through Eri and him. Oh, I can't wait to get my hands on his body, Overhaul would be thinking. Overhaul himself would have taken 4 of the 8 precepts of death with him, since he wanted to have 4 left behind in order to guard Eri, and these 4 precepts that he had taken with him would be incredibly useful in case he needed to absorb them against Deku, seeing as he has control over his rewind to such mastery. Unless they can jump him by surprise, which is unlikely, it would be very unlikely they'd be able to capture him with just Overhaul's power alone. The 4 precepts that Chisaki would have chosen would be Kendo Rappa, Hikiji Tengai, Hari Kurono, and finally, Joy Irinaka. All 5 members of the Yakuza's quirks were going to be rather important in order for them to be able to actually take down Midoriya. The one factor that Chisaki is not considering is that Deku also has One For All, which he hasn't seen much of yet, considering that he's so much tunnel visioned on the idea of using Rewind. So Deku's Rewind ability is the only thing on his mind. It doesn't come into his attention when he's watching how Deku's making such fast movements or how he's so physically strong. but we'll get back into that later. Meanwhile, we see the heroes are training, with most of them using similar routines to what they were doing in the original. Bakugo dipping his hands in hot water to expand his sweat glands before blasting a massive explosion overhead. We see Todoroki using his half-hot, half-cold ability by pretty much doing the same thing he did in the original, just using a big jug of water, and then using hot and cold on it over and over again to practice switching between the two quirks, and also practice his heat regulation between his body. Anyhow, aside from the other members of Class 1A, we would then see Izuku Midoriya, who would also be doing his own training, using both Rewind as well as One for All. Deku is working on his own technique, or, well, I guess you could say it's more of a habit than technique he was trying to build, as Deku is working on trying to increase his pain tolerance. Deku would continuously be using Rewind on his body over and over again as he charges 100% of One for All into his body, full cowling. Deku would be flashing, glitching, and as his body would be continuously ripping itself apart and then rewinding itself back into position. So to the average person, it looks as if though he's just standing there, with random flashes of electricity charging off of it. An effect of this that would actually help Deku is that while Chizukai is watching through binoculars, the ground under Deku would continuously crack and then fix itself from Rewind and One for All's effect. So Chizukai would be thinking that Deku is training to affect non-living things by repeatedly breaking and then unbreaking the ground with Rewind, which would be what he thought he was doing, when Deku is actually working more so on One for All, using Rewind to deal with the pain, as he continuously feels himself and getting used to One for All's ability at 100%. God, it hurts so bad. Every cell of my body is burning, over and over again. It's like I'm being tortured. I feel like I'm dying. Ah! Deku would fall to the ground as he falls out of his One for All, cowling, and Rewind states, continuously looping with each other. As he falls to the ground, smoke would come off his body, as he now lays there for a bit, laying, and begins breathing in and out rather heavily. Midoriya, are you alright? Aizawa would say as he walks over, seeing Deku laying on the ground. Yep, I'm just peachy, Aizawa-sensei. Deku would pull himself up, brushing himself off and putting the dirt back on the ground, as he would then get back into his stancing position, saying he's got to get back to it. The ground would crack again as he begins gritting his teeth, his face looking strained, as sweat continues dripping down his face. His body would all look buffed up and tense, as his hair would be flowing around his face, his horn now having electricity now raging over his entire body. As Deku would continue practicing using Rewind on his entire body continuously, while using 100% of One for All. His bones would feel like they were cracking from the amount of times he'd been rewinding and using One for All 100% on them. After another hour, Deku couldn't take it anymore as he falls to the ground, his stamina having pretty much completely drained. Deku would be one of the first ones to drop out as he falls pretty much unconscious. Everyone who had been watching around him would have been pretty freaked out seeing the amount of times that he screamed in pain and how many times he'd fallen over. But now that he was finally knocked out, the screaming had stopped, so that was good. Overall, himself wouldn't have heard the screaming since they were way too far away. He would have just seen Deku falling over a few times, thinking that it has to come down to how difficult Rewind must be to use, since Eri on the other hand has pretty much no control over Rewind at all. So it makes sense to him onto why he'd be struggling using it. Midoriya would have been let off the hook for today, putting him back in his room where he was now sleeping. After a couple more hours of training, the other students would then also turn in as they decided to get dinner, with them making their own. Everyone would eat except for Deku, who was still knocked unconscious, and Bakugo would laugh saying what a weakling. And everyone who had been around Deku when they were training would look back over to him with a grimace, after seeing the amount of pain Deku was in. Deku at this current point in time can only maintain that rewinding 100% state for 1 hour, before his stamina completely runs out and he's unable to use Rewind or One for All for quite a while. Eventually a few more days would pass with nothing going awry, just like it had in the original. That is, until eventually it would come for the night of the test of courage, just like it had in the original. At this point in time, Deku had already figured out where Koda's secret hiding spot was from the past few days when he'd gone to go and get Koda for dinner, since he'd actually have not been unconscious during those days. Anyhow, it was eventually time for the test of courage, one of the final events for during that summer training camp itself actually. And everyone would pretty much be in the same spots that they would have been in the original, when suddenly the villain's attack would begin. As smoke begins descending across the entire landscape, the Vanguard squad would then go on to go and try and find their target, and the Yakuza would take the opportunity of this chance to try and find Midoriya themselves. Midoriya, as I would say. Yes, I got it. Rewind! Deku would activate Rewind as he touches the smoke, As he does so, he'd cover his mouth with his other hand, as the smoke begins to rewind itself back towards the start from where it came from. The quirk user of the smoke would be shocked, wondering what's going on, as all of his smoke begins returning back to him and compressing itself back into his body, back to where the quirk originated from. Suddenly, Kendo and Yaoyorozu would show up, along with them being Kirishima and Tetsutetsu. As all four of them would show up against the villain, they would take them down pretty easily, as the other villains would realize what's going on, seeing as Deku had been using Rewind. Smart, Shizukai would be thinking. This isn't gonna be easy, but I'm not going to give up. All five of the Yakuza would then descend on the area itself, seeing Deku. Let's do this. Deku would suddenly start running away as he had been heard something from one of the Bobs. What? They begin to follow him as they all run through the forest. Suddenly, electricity began to cover Deku's body. What's he doing? Overall would be wondering. Suddenly, Deku began moving faster as he begins leaping from tree to tree. What the? Can Rewind do that? He'd be wondering. It doesn't matter. We have to get moving. Rappa would pick up his other comrades as he begins running at full speed using his quirk, saying they can't let him get away. Deku would suddenly arrive at Koda's space, where the Pixie Bomb had told him to actually grab Koda and make sure he was safe, with them not even knowing where he was. We would see Muscular standing there as Koda was in fear. Hey, you there, villain! Get away from Koda! As Muscular would turn around, seeing Deku, it'd be already too late. As Deku was using 25% of One For All, he'd be moving forward. Muscular began blocking his body with muscles, but it wouldn't matter. The moment that Deku touched him, the fight was over. Overall, I'll be watching in awe, as Deku activates Rewind at the last second. Your biggest mistake against me was being a close-range fighter, because that's the greatest weakness to anyone who ever has to fight me. Rewind! Deku would use Rewind as he touches Muscular, with Muscular having no idea what's happening. As his muscles would begin receding back into his body, he'd realize that this kid has some sort of anti-quirk ability. He began pushing out his muscles even faster, at a faster rate, and Deku would be trying to keep up at the same time, with them now being in a standstill. The Yakuza would take opportunity of this, as Rappa comes moving forward trying to knock Deku out from behind. Look out! Koda would say. Deku would turn around just in time, as he uses his other hand blocking Rappa's fist using One For All. Ah! The fist would strike into Deku's arm, as Deku would fight back. I can't afford to lose here, Deku would say. He would then activate both Rewind and One For All, 100%, as his Rewind and One For All destruction speed would then come to a match. Suddenly, Deku's hair began to float over, as his hair would rise, electricity began to spark over him, as his eyes have an electric green look to them. Deku, when he's using Rewind on himself and One For All, cannot use Rewind on other people's bodies. Basically, as long as he's focusing on counteracting One For All's effects, he can't use Rewind against anything else. Muscular began growing muscles, but it wouldn't matter. As Deku simply throws a small jab towards him, he'd go flying across the forest, getting knocked down a single hit, crashing through a mile of forest before eventually stopping, completely knocked out and down for the count. Rappa would be shocked as Deku's eyes would turn towards him next, flickering on him. Rappa would only have a split second, and Hikaji would then step in using his shield ability, which can absorb shockwaves, jumping in just in time, as Deku throws another punch, faster than the eye can see. Both Rappa and Hijiki would be sent flying backwards, the punch just shattering Hijiki's shield, as Rappa and himself would be sent flying back, but not nearly as far as Muscular. Overhaul would see this strength and take this opportunity. I need to take him down now! As Overhaul jumps out from the woods trying to grab Deku, he would reach him just in time as Deku was distracted. Another villain? Deku would be thinking. The moment Overhaul pulls his glove off as his hand touches Deku, Deku's entire arm would fall off, as Deku would be shocked. Suddenly, Deku would activate Rewind at a faster rate, as his arm would begin to regenerate, completely growing back. Overhaul would be shocked as he sees this regeneration speed, as Deku would then prepare to throw another punch. Overhaul would quickly use his quirk, Overhaul, to pull some stone from the ground, blocking the punch just and barely, as the stone along with Overhaul gets sent flying backwards, knocking him into a tree. Damn it, you made my hand dirty. He begins scratching in his hand, thinking that it's so disgusting how he had to do that. Deku would be shocked looking down his other arm, which had just been disconnected from his body, as he looks down his new arm. What was that quirk? Deku would say he needs to take care of this fast, as his stamina won't be lasting as long as it usually does since he'd been training earlier that day. I maybe have 5 minutes where I can maintain this form. I have to make sure all of these guys are taken out now. While Deku was thinking of that plan, Overhaul would have grabbed the other two, using his Overhaul ability, making his arms buffer, and grabbed them and run, saying they need to get out of there. He's way too strong. That is not Rewind. There's no way. That's a strength enhancer quirk. and it has something to do with his rewind, but is it possible he can have 2 quirks? No. There's no way. I'm gonna have to go back and run more tests on Eri. Deku would tell him, "Hey, wait!" as he tries to run forward, stepping forward at fast speeds. Overhaul would quickly use his overhaul ability on the ground, creating many spikes and trying to block Deku's path. Prioritize human lives, Deku would be thinking. Those guys gave up really easily, but I can't blame them after seeing what happened to that other villain. Deku would turn back to Kota as he deactivates his rewind and one for all at the same time. "Are you okay?" Kota would nod, saying and thinking, "That's my hero." Huh? Deku would wonder. Kota would tell him to shut up as he says nothing, with Kota smiling after seeing Muscular, the guy that'd beat his parents like that, completely overwhelmed by a hero. I guess some heroes can really beat the villains, huh? Deku would pick up Kota as he says that they need to get back to the area, as Deku would then use 25% of one for all, as he begins running through the forest, jumping from tree to tree. The Yakuza begin withdrawing, saying that Overhaul himself, he can't fall here. They're still working on developing their anti-quirk bullet. If only we can get a few more anti-quirk bullets. If I can shoot him with one, and take out his quirk temporarily, then we can capture him. That's gotta be the only way, Overhaul will be thinking. The Yakuza can't die here. I'll use Eri. I'll find a way to counteract Rewind, and whatever else he has as well. I'm going to take you, Azuku Midoriya. Overhaul would then call back the rest of the Yakuza he had taken with him, and as the Yakuza group would then escape, saying they'll be back for him some other time. The League of Villains, on the other hand, would continue strong, with now that Deku had been distracted by Muscular and Overhaul for a decent amount of time, would have gotten the rest of their plans pretty well done, with Dabi and Twice using their clone strategy on Aizawa. Now it was about time, as Mr. Compress was about to abduct Bakugo. They could make it back to the campsite pretty fast and drop Kota off, saying that he's got him. They would thank him for saving Kota. Kota would then be put inside to be kept safe. At this point, Aizawa had already sent out the message to the students, saying that under his authority as a Razorhead, he was allowing them to use their quirks to defend themselves and fight the villains. So Deku would then head off trying to go find the rest of the hero Class 1A students and Class 1B students, trying to find where they were and what was going on with the villains. Suddenly, a jab of darkness would slam into Deku. What was that? As he slams into the tree, shattering it. He would then fall to the ground, feeling a bit weak as he's shaking. Deku pulls himself up, and as he looks up, he would see Dark Shadow rampaging across the land. As another strike from Dark Shadow was about to crash into Deku, Deku would jump out of the way, leaping. Deku would try to use Rewind as he touches the darkness, trying to rewind the Dark Shadow back to its original state. But it didn't work. What? The darkness isn't a physical object or a living thing. It's an energy, so I don't think you'll be able to rewind it using your quirk. Standing next to Deku before grabbing him and jumping away from the next attack, we would then see the duplicate arms user, Shoji? We see Shoji and Deku as they're now moving through the forest, with Deku saying he's fine, he would put him down, as the two continue running, with Deku using one for all to increase his movement speed. Shoji, what do we do? How can we stop Dark Shadow from rampaging like this? Shoji would say he doesn't know, but he does know that Dark Shadow has a weakness to light, so if they can get Todoroki or Bakugo over here, then it might be possible. Conversely, the two groups would be running towards each other almost at the same time, as Deku and Shoji would be leading Dark Shadow away from the rest of the main campsite. Bakugo and Todoroki would be together as they're running from the Moon Tooth user, the guy with the long metal teeth that just keep expanding, as they've tried using explosions and flames and ice, and he just keeps breaking through all of it. As they're running closer together, we would see Bakugo and Deku make eye contact. Hey, we were just looking for you. We actually need... Deku, get out of the way! Bakugo would say, as he and Todoroki jump to the side. Deku and Shoji would do the same as Dark Shadow crashes into a moonfish. Dark Shadow began to overwhelm him as the darkness would begin cracking in the guy's teeth as he'd eventually be ripped from his skull. As Moonfish would then fall to the ground, being defeated by Dark Shadow. We need you guys to use your... Yeah, we know. Bakugo would use explosions, and Todoroki would then use his flames until Dark Shadow was tamed, causing the darkness to recede, as you then see Tokoyami just sitting on the ground, completely passed out, before opening his eyes a bit, saying that was intense. Thanks, guys. Almost as if though on cue, Deku would have no time to respond, as his stamina is low from using Rewind and One For All, and having to carry Kota all the way back, and everything else he's just done. Kachan! Suddenly, Bakugo would have been grabbed, as we see him, Mr. Compress now with a pearl in his hand. Put Kachan down right now, Deku would say, as he began to charge One For All across his body. Mr. Compress would begin running away, as Deku leaps into the air, catching on the tree. "Midoriya, wait," Todoroki would say, but he would already be running, as Mr. Compress would be laughing, saying he's got the target. He would now have 2 pearls in his hand that he grabbed, a stick and Bakugo. He would immediately drop one of the pearls and then start running away, as Deku would leap trying to grab it, thinking that he must have ditched Bakugo and ran, not knowing that the villains were actually after Bakugo himself. As he grabs the pearl and begins shattering it, the pearl would break open as just a stick's on the ground. What? He would then jump back up as he tries to find and get Mr. Compress, but it's too late. Just as he's about to enter the portal, Bakugo would be released from the pearl, as he reaches his hand out telling him, "Deku, don't come!" Izuku would stop moving, sliding to a stop, as he would reach his hand out towards Bakugo. "Kacchan!" The villains, along with Bakugo, would disappear, as the Vanguard squad has successfully captured Katsuki Bakugo. Last time, Bakugo has just been captured and was sent through the portal, with Deku landing right as the portal dissipated, with his classmate having been stolen, his friend having been captured by villains. No, Kacchan! Deku would reach his hand out. Damn it! Deku would slam his fist into the ground. As he uses Rewind, the ground would begin to grow immensely, as grass would begin to sprout all around him as life energy flows out of him. "Midoriya, calm down," Todoroki would say. Damn it! Deku would look up, realizing it was his mistake. They were after both of us. Were they working together? Those villains earlier and that one? There were so many. But why would they want me and Kacchan? We have to report back to Mr. Aizawa now. Midoriya, come on. There might still be some villains here. Okay. Deku would get up, following Todoroki's lead, as he and Tokuyami would then begin to head back to the camp. Deku, having made it back, would tell Aizawa the news, along with the other students having reported their losses. Luckily, no one was seriously hurt or killed, but many people were left unconscious with minor wounds. Something could have really happened that was bad. Koda would be safe since Deku saved him last time by defeating Muscular and Rappa and Overhaul all at the same time using 100% Rewind. The moment Deku enters into the room, he passes out and falls to the ground, having used up all of his energy from both One For All and Rewind. Since, as I explained previously in this What If, Deku's Rewind and One For All capabilities both have storage capabilities. Since One For All is a storage enhancer type quirk, the way that it works is it stores up power and then has to be used all in one burst. And the way it works with all the other users' power all adds up. You guys know about that. But with Rewind, it rewinds time. See, Deku has to store time in order to be able to use Rewind, which we have seen proven with Eri and her situations that we've seen in the manga. So that's where I'm taking this from. So Deku in this timeline has 2 requirements he has to meet. Stamina in order to maintain One For All, and he has to maintain enough time for Rewind in order to actually rewind his body fast enough to cancel the effects of 100% One For All so he doesn't die. So Deku is obviously unconscious, with everyone extremely worried about him. His body would be physically unwounded, but he'd be exhausted, his stamina and mental strain at its limit. Midoriya would be completely unconscious for 2 weeks. Deku's vision would be foggy, him blinking once, twice, 3 times, and then finally being able to see his surroundings. You're awake! This would be when we see Kirishima. Kirishima sitting next to Deku's bed along with the other Class 1A students. The doctor said you might be waking up soon, so we all decided to come and visit you. Kirishima? Yeah, you okay? Deku would just look up to Kirishima asking, "Is Kacchan?" Everyone would look down, with Deku realizing that that actually happened. That wasn't just a nightmare. Damn it. Deku would try and pull himself up as everyone insists that he rests. Deku now actually sitting forward says he feels fine. Kirishima, seeing this, would tighten his fist, as he then yells out to everyone that they should go and save Bakugo themselves. With the help of Momo's device that she planted on that Nomu, they can actually go and find and rescue him themselves. This would be when we see Ida. Ida would be standing straight, his eyes now covered by his face, as he remembers the events that had occurred during the attack from Hero Killer Stain. No, I highly disagree against that idea. If us students merely got in the way of the pro heroes, maybe all we would do is end up getting Katsuki Bakugo killed instead of actually saved. You can't be so pessimistic, Kirishima would say, holding his fist up. That's not what a real man would do. Ida would look up saying, no, but it is what a real hero would do. Class 1 would be a little conflicted, with most of them feeling the same way as Ida and trying to persuade Kirishima it's not worth it. This would be when Todoroki would step in, saying, "Actually, I agree." "But what? You can't be serious, Todoroki." Todoroki would look up, talking to the rest of his classmates, saying, "If we save Bakugo from the villains now, then the pro heroes would be able to focus purely on the villains, and then we'd be able to hit two birds with one stone." Everyone would gasp thinking about this idea, realizing that he's not wrong, but how? How could just mere students beat these powerful villains? How could they save their friend? This would be when Froppy would step in, saying that they should just leave Katsuki's rescue to the pro heroes. Since the forest incident, we've all been prevented from taking part in any combat, especially after Eraserhead had to take the fall for allowing so many undergraduate heroes to actually use their quirks in battle. Tokoyami would nod, agreeing, saying that Froppy is right. But there's nothing I can really say, since you all saved me so many times. We see flashbacks of Deku, Todoroki, and Bakugo using their light, as they would then free Tokoyami from Dark Shadow during the forest incident. Froppy would then say that she understands how everyone feels, but we need Todoroki and Kirishima to be level-headed, because if they do go along with their plan, just dealing only with their feelings, then their actions are no different than villains. The weight of these thoughts would remain on everyone's mind, as a doctor would barge through the silence, opening a door and entering, asking the Class 1A students to leave so he can speak to Izuku privately. Class 1A would then agree to his terms and leave the room, with them all filing out in an orderly fashion, thinking about their decision and what they wanted to do. As Class 1A leaves the room, Izuku and Kirishima tells Midoriya that they already talked to Momo yesterday, and they decided that they're going to go rescue Bakugo tonight. "I'm not going to ask for your help, because you were just wiped out for 2 weeks, but if you really want to help, I know how you feel." He gave Izuku a fist bump, saying that he knows he's the most frustrated one out of all of them. They'll wait for them outside the hospital before leaving. Kirishima would then walk away, as he then moves aside for the doctor, calmly shutting the door behind him. The doctor would cough, saying that, "Thanks to your quirk, you sustained no major injuries, but we can tell that your body's going under immense strain every time you use that power. Thanks to Recovery Girl's efforts and your quirk Rewind, you have almost no damage though. I feel I should say this to you as a medical professional, that if you continue to follow down this path of using that strength, I'm not so sure it'll last forever." What do you mean?" Midoriya would ask. The doctor would frown, thinking about a theory he had heard a long time ago. Something about quirk singularities. He would push the thought aside, saying nothing as he smiled, saying, "On the other hand, though, he has something to give to Midoriya." The doctor would pull out from his coat pocket a handwritten letter, this being a letter from Koda. The doctor hands the letter to Izuku. The letter then says thanks to Izuku for saving him, and he hopes that Izuku will get better soon so he can thank him in person. The doctor tells Izuku that he'll be discharged today, saying he has no major injuries, but to watch himself, saying his stamina is low, so he should probably get a lot of sleep and eat good for the next couple of weeks. Deku would nod, thanking the doctor, as he would then walk off. Later that night, Todoroki and Kirishima would be waiting outside the hospital for Izuku and Yaoyorozu. Midoriya and Yaoyorozu would eventually arrive, but before Yaoyorozu can say anything, Ida would appear. Ida walks out from behind the building, out of the shadow, saying that he's angry, that they're about to repeat that same mistake he had made at Hosu. He looks up to see Izuku, and he says, "Despite that you know that you're breaking the rules, that this is against the law." Tenya would then throw a punch at Izuku. He wouldn't even try to dodge taking it. Tenya is angry and frustrated they're not taking his concerns, his feelings, his worry, all of it into consideration to this. And it's not just him. Him and the rest of the class doesn't want to see Izuku or any of them end up with any severe injuries. They don't want to see any of their classmates die. Just losing Bakugo was enough. Can we not lose any more? Tenya would say. Everyone would be quiet. Even Deku and Kirishima would say nothing. Todoroki would then speak up. "Ida, we're not planning to engage with the villains in combat." "What do you mean? That's impossible." This is when Kirishima will step in, saying that, "Actually, their rescue is going to be covert." "Yaoyorozu, can you explain the rest of the plan?" Yaoyorozu would clear her throat after that intense air that was surrounding them just mere moments ago. Actually, I came along in order to prevent them from engaging in combat. Midori would look up, telling Ida that after failing to save Bakugo at the training camp, I just have a feeling that I need to be the one to save him. Ida would see that they're determined and their resolve. And now knowing that they're not planning to actually fight anyone, Ida would cheer up, not feeling as tense anymore. Well then, I suppose if you're not planning on fighting anyone, I can go with you then. Meanwhile, on the Pro Heroes side, All Might, Endeavor, Best Genist, and Edgeshot begin their strategy meeting with Naomasa, the police chief, regarding the rescue of Katsuki Bakugo, this operation. They would discuss their plan on entry as well as in case any Nomus should appear, and taking care of any threats ahead of time. All Might will break through the wall. After that, all hell will break loose. Everyone, you're pro heroes, so I'm expecting you all to do your best work. Hero Society is looking at us right now. No, the world is looking at us right now. If we fail here, who knows what the future might hold. Everyone would nod. Meanwhile, inside the League of Villains hideout, we can see Bakugo strapped and restrained to a chair, surrounded by the members of the Vanguard Action Squad from the League of Villains. And a few other people in the room too. That being a weakened Rappa, as well as the other Mafia members from the Chiha Saikai, with them being Overhaul. Kurogiri and Tomura Shigaraki would be there as well. Shigaraki would ask Bakugo, as he then says, "You don't seem like the kind of guy to be a hero. You would much more enjoy my future of destruction. So, join me, Katsuki Bakugo. Come on, help me burn this entire Hero Society to the ground. I want you to explode its pillars, crush it, and watch the entire world fall." As he reaches his hand out to Bakugo, Bakugo would look up, as he then tells him to drop the small talk and go die. Shigaraki would have a wicked smile under the hand, planted firmly over his face. Disgusting. What? This would be when Shigaraki would turn around, seeing the Chiha Sakai leader, that being Overhaul, standing there. Overhaul would be pulling a glove off as he begins walking forward. Is this really how you make deals, League of Villains? As he walks forward, he would then reach his hand towards Bakugo, as Bakugo would shout, "Don't touch me!" As Overhaul then tells him to shut up. Overhaul would reach forward, saying it's not like he wants to touch his filthy skin anyway. As he then touches Bakugo's hand, Bakugo's eyes would become hollow, shrinking into small red points from the pain. "No, anything but that. Don't!" Bakugo would lose everything, as he screams out in pain, his voice going hoarse, as Chiha Sakai would then take his other hand. Now, zooming out, we can see the bloody stumps that used to be Katsuki Bakugo's arms, having been removed from Overhaul, as they were now growing out of the wood floorboards which he was touching with his other hand. Oh my... Bakugo began vomiting, as the blood loss would begin to make his head spin. Shigaraki would be watching silently, as deep inside Bakugo's head he could only be thinking one thing. They just took everything from me. Bakugo was now quirkless, the one ability that made him special. His sweat, that was able to create explosions, the one thing that set him apart from the maggots, the worms of this world, was taken from him by this damn villain. I'm so weak. That's all that Bakugo could think in his mind. Nothing else besides the suffering and the pain edging away from his arms. "You're now just a regular person," Chiha Sakai would say. "Well, you can either be called No Hand Bakugo, or you can join up with these assholes," Overhaul would say. "Wow, you're ruthless," Twice would say. Dabi would say nothing, saying I would have gone harder on him, as he shows a blue flame, thinking about how he would have done it. Overhaul turns, not impressed from Dabi's bravado, as he then looks back to Bakugo. Bakugo would be holding the tears back as he looks up, with the decision actually weighing on his mind. Quirkless forever. Or a villain. Bakugo would then smile as he looks up, saying, "Go to hell." This would be when Overhaul would begin to reach towards his face, about to kill him. Bakugo's heart would slowly stop as he thinks, this is the end, huh? Suddenly, All Might would come crashing through the back of the bricks, slamming through the wall, as he tells him to stay away from young Bakugo. Overhaul would look up, ready to reach his hand towards All Might, but before he can do anything, Edgeshot would begin to restrain him. Rappa, get me out of here. The other Mafia members, now loyal to Hasakai, would then run forward, now grabbing Edgeshot and ripping him off of him before pulling him back. All Might would then throw a mighty punch as Shigaraki and the other League of Villains try and tank the blow. The building would explode, as the heroes grab Bakugo and try and make a getaway. Before anything can happen though, suddenly, someone would teleport into Kamino Ward. A voice could be heard throughout all of their heads, as he was here. All for one. All Might would protect the other pro heroes, tanking the blow, as All Might, with his newfound strength that Midoriya had blessed him with, would be able to easily tank this attack, which would surprise All for One, as well as the League of Villains, having seen him almost defeated by a Nomu the last time they'd fought. What happened? Tomura would be thinking. It seems that he's found someone capable of healing those injuries. I wonder, All for One would be saying, laughing as he appears floating down from the sky. Master! Shigaraki would look up saying, I'll fight with you. No, Tomura. It's time for you all to get out of here and take him with you. All for One would point to Bakugo. All Might would say there's no chance, as the pro heroes would be trying to rush Bakugo off of the scene. Meanwhile, Deku, Ida, and Todoroki would be running, as they realized they were at the wrong place. They had been where the Nomus were, which was the main mistake that they'd run into. The Nomus that Yaoyorozu had actually tracked were at a whole different facility than where Bakugo was being kept at. But now, seeing on the news, they knew exactly where he was. It's not that far, we can make it. The other students would stay behind, with them not having quirks fast enough to actually keep up. So they would have to wait for a car if they actually wanted to participate, with Kirishima telling Deku, Ida, and Todoroki to go. The three would be running at fast speeds, Deku using One for All, Todoroki with his ice, and Ida using his engine quirk, as they'd be making it towards Kamino Ward. As they would finally arrive, they'd see Bakugo, with the pro heroes now getting ripped out of his clutches as the villains are trying to take him. The Hasakai would be trying to escape, as they would turn around seeing Deku one last time, before Chi Hasakai would make a motion towards Deku. Overhaul would hold two fingers up, as he then makes a creepy smile towards him, pulling off his mask. As Deku sees this, something would suddenly piece into place. No. What is... Deku would have a memory, a flashback, to when he was much younger. Deku would be playing with a little girl, his mom nearby as well as his grandpa. He hadn't seen Grandpa in years, not after something bad happened. I thought he died, Deku would be thinking, his mom having told him that they can't see Grandpa anymore. Izuku Oni-chan, please come play with me again. Deku in his memory would then see a tall man, much older than he was at the time, but younger than he is now, standing there. Without that weird bird mask, it would be Chi Hasakai, the adopted son of his grandfather. No. No. There's no way that can be. This would be when Overhaul would disappear, as Deku realizes the truth. They were after him, and they had his younger cousin, Eri, with him. I'll save you, I promise, he'd be thinking. But now I have to save my friend. Eri, I'll be there. I'll be there soon. Deku would have fallen behind, having been momentarily distracted from the now creepy situation he was finding himself in, with him realizing that his younger cousin was possibly in extreme danger, as well as realizing that his grandfather and his family was actually a part of the main Yakuza of Japan, which he had not particularly known until now. Midoriya would run forward looking to try and find his friend, Kacchan. As Deku, Ida, and Todoroki would move forward, this would be their only chance. Deku would leap forward as he then calls out his name. In this version, Bakugo would be a dear friend of Deku, his rival, but his friend, respected. Someone who had equal power to him growing up, someone who would actually be a challenge maybe, to be the first hero, the #1 hero of the world, to beat All Might. Someone who could dare to stand up to him. Bakugo would turn, rushing forward as Deku would see his hands. Deku's thoughts would switch from happy to see Bakugo to rage. Who did this to you? Bakugo would say nothing as he reaches Deku. The moment Deku would reach Bakugo, Deku would embrace Kacchan, as a green light would entrap both of them. Suddenly, Bakugo's hands begin to regenerate as they come back fully back to how they were before. "You idiot," Deku would be saying. "Thanks." "You don't have to say that," Deku would say. Who did this to you?" He would look into Bakugo's eyes. Bakugo would look up, gritting his teeth as he says, "I'm gonna kill them." Deku would say, "I know." Bakugo would say, "It was that weird bird guy. He's so dead the next time I find him and I'm not tied to a chair." Deku would turn, the League of Villains now focusing on him, as All For One would notice the very unique quirk standing before him. All Might would notice Midoriya and the others telling him to get out of there. Deku would turn to All Might telling him to go, as All Might would realize what he's saying. All For One would have no idea what's going on, but suddenly All Might would begin to sprint towards Deku. "Stop him," All For One would say, but no one would be fast enough as he tries to fly forward to stop them from making contact. The others begin to run away, not understanding, as Bakugo turns, telling Deku not to die. Deku would turn, giving a thumbs up, and as the moment All Might reaches Deku, Deku would then activate Rewind, saying, "We never thought I'd have to come down to this, huh?" All Might would nod, saying, "Well, if there's any time to do it, it'd be now." As soon as All Might and Deku would meet, Deku would now use Rewind on All Might's age, something that they had agreed to not do beforehand, which many of you had enlightened me in the comments he should have. But, as I've been trying to say, it would look pretty weird if All Might, who was an old man at this point, just suddenly turned back to being a young guy. And so, Deku would finally use Rewind to restore All Might's youth. Something that only he could do, not even Eri had enough precise control over Rewind to do, because he has One For All right now, giving him the capability to actually have complete control of time over an object. Something that Deku has been working on and trying to master during the past couple of months. As All Might begins to de-age, All For One would begin to see his path to victory having been completely lost. "Tomura Shigaraki, leave now. My fate is sealed. But we found the next successor." Tomura would turn, saying, "No, I can't." Before Tomura could do anything, this would be when All For One would use the teleporting quirk, forcibly teleporting all of the League of Villains away, back to the Doctor to save them. All Might would now be back in his prime, with Deku having reset his time and his power. All Might would turn, telling Midoriya to get out of there, saying he's got this now thanks to him. Deku would turn as he begins to run, with All For One seeing that tantalizing quirk, the ability to control one's time, a perfect immortality. All things come with prices, though, he'd be thinking, wondering what would happen to that boy. No matter. I'll claim that power for myself one day, and then I'll restore my own body. I suppose I'd have no need for Shigaraki after that point. My poor Tomura. As he says this, All Might would leap forward at blinding speeds, throwing a Delaware smash, as All Might is about to decimate All For One. All Might rushes forward, throwing a punch at All For One. All For One in mid-thought of him thinking about stealing Midoriya's quirk, the quirk of Rewind, the ability to control one's time. All Might throwing this punch would be way stronger than All For One at this point. Even with all the surgeries that All For One had undergone at this point, his body was in nowhere near the condition it had been when All Might had defeated him before. And thanks to Midoriya's immense power of healing, matching the likes of Josuke Higashikata from JoJo's, which is just the ability to restore everything. All Might is at peak condition right now, just turning All For One into a pinwheel, sending him flying all over the Kamina ward. But for some reason, as All Might continues to throw All For One around, he can feel his strength waning. But why? All Might would wonder. All Might would feel the flames flickering of One For All. While Rewind had confused the essence of One For All for a mere moment, bursting with a surge of All Might's power, it hadn't created a new variant of One For All. One of One For All's unique qualities is a quirk, something that allowed the original Deku, back during the original timeline, to use Eri's Rewind to his advantage against Overhaul, is its resistance to Rewind. Something about this resistance would also apply to Deku's manipulation of time. So, Rewind Deku is unable to completely restore One For All, at least restore the power that it once held in a previous vessel. All Might finds himself completely unable to tap into more power. While his physical body is definitely younger, his strength is now getting weaker than when it was before. He has to use it. Eventually, after All For One is falling to the ground, he's beginning to notice that All Might's punches are feeling lighter and lighter every touch, noticing that this drawback that he himself thought Rewind could have was already applying to One For All. An unfortunate but all too realistic side effect that All For One had predicted. All For One would catch one of All Might's punches, as All Might's arm would go limp, with All For One taking All Might's arm and twisting it, hearing a nasty crack as we hear All Might scream. The helicopter spinning around the dark ward, lights flashing down on the battle between the two monsters. All Might, now throwing another punch with his other hand at All For One, will be caught, as All For One begins to twist All Might's other arm. All Might would headbutt All For One, sending him falling back and letting go of All Might's arms, as All Might's arms would be completely bruised and broken, similar to how Izuku Midoriya's arms look when he uses 100% of One For All and shatters his body. The purple flesh and dark coating over his limbs from the strain, matching the same type of injuries that he endured when he first battled All For One in the original timeline. Toshinori, no, All Might would point towards the cameras, as he then says that it's your turn. Izuku Midoriya, Katsuki Bakugo, and Shota Todoroki all paying attention as they're caught by his words. All Might would go through with it, using all of his power remaining. United States Smash! Just ripping into All For One. All Might rearranged All For One's skull. For reference, All For One was completely knocked out and barely on the brink of life when him and All Might would then pass out, completely spent. All Might pulling his fist up for one last hurrah in his classic pose before falling to the ground, everyone in the world practically cheering for his victory. This being All Might's final victory. A couple weeks would have passed already after this point, and Izuku would have tried many times to try and bring One For All back within All Might, and it not working. With this, they would have learned that Rewind doesn't have the capability to restore quirks like One For All, and by extension, All For One. So, with this idea in mind, with All Might and Deku's original plan being Deku just going to All For One and rewinding him to take away his quirk, that is not possible anymore. It appears that All For One and One For All have so many vestiges connected to it that it's just impossible to rewind all of them without physical contact. He would need to have contact with all of the people who possessed that quirk beforehand in order to rewind their genetics to completely dispose of the quirk's origins. For those who read My Hero Academia's manga, Stars and Stripes is a good example of what I'm talking about and why Rewind wouldn't have an effect on this. It's also just a personal belief that if Izuku Midoriya had been hit by one of those quirk erasing bullets during the overhaul arc, it probably wouldn't have had an effect. If anything, it probably would have erased one of the multiple quirks inside One For All, like the newest one, which would be Float. So I doubt that it would erase all of the quirks though, just because of the way that it's shown later on in the manga how quirks are in this vestige realm. Anyway, I digress. It has been a few weeks since All Might had battled All For One, with Izuku Midoriya and his classmates having returned back to daily life. Izuku by this point is already beginning to look for tabs on Eri, his cousin. If you all remember what happened back during the Forest training arc, Deku learned of Overhaul, as well as the Mafia there. And when he saw him, he had memories. He had memories of actually playing with Eri and meeting this Chisakai guy. It was his grandpa's adopted son, so it was like his uncle. And he had never seen him again after one point. Those memories that had been repressed, that had awakened, would lead Deku to believe that his grandfather, and by extension Eri, his cousin, are being kept or somehow imprisoned by Overhaul. Deku's thoughts on his Yakuza history as well as his cousin would have to take a back seat for now, as it was time for the UA students of Class 1A, and just in general, to go for their Hero Provisional License exams, especially with everything that happened after All Might became known to the world to have lost his power, to have the symbol of peace lost. Villains were now becoming more active. This meaning that it was time for more heroes to fight the Swell. And of course, that means that Izuku's class would be going as well. Izuku would be forbidden to use his quirk to turn his fellow competitors into infants, which was established by Aizawa at the beginning of the competition. Because realistically, he could do that. That is a viable option for Izuku Midoriya to do, is just to turn his enemies into children, which is possible for him. Obviously, Deku wasn't going to try this approach anyway for the sake of the competition, but if he's fighting a villain, this is a very viable strategy. And that idea should probably work if Rewind to rewind someone before they have their quirk on pretty much everyone besides people with One for All and All for One. Or Stars and Stripes, but he doesn't know that yet. Anyway, Deku would make it through the provisional license exam with almost no hitch, almost being tricked by Kami, who turns out to be Toga, but he would realize that Uraraka is not Uraraka, turn back using Rewind to thrust a tree and sprout it immediately, hitting her away before she can use the ball to deactivate Deku and take him out of the competition. Deku would eventually make it through, pretty much making it the same way as he did in canon, Todoroki having the same problems with Windman, Bakugo being Bakugo, and the events end as normal, with nothing particularly different happening. This arc was pretty boring in the anime and manga in general too, so I don't think him having Rewind would cause him to do worse, considering he only had One for All in the original, right? And so with him having another ability, an additional ability, which even allows him to control One for All better by being able to up his power by reversing the damage on his body, Deku is pretty set. He just has to not be overconfident, and this version of Deku isn't particularly, so I think he would do fine. Anyway, he would get his license, be incredibly proud of himself, and send a picture to All Might, who would give him the thumbs up, with the two of them being extremely happy and proud of Deku's accomplishment and his growth, his step next towards becoming the new symbol of peace after All Might. Which is then almost immediately invalidated, because we see Izuku Midoriya taking the trash out from the UA Class 1A dorms. Midoriya is dropping the garbage out, as he was in the original, when a face comes through the wall, this being his first ever meeting with Mirio. Not knowing who this is quite yet, Deku would now have the same conversation he had in the original, interested in his quirk and freaked out that someone just put their face through the wall and the floor, having no idea who this guy is. That is until the next class day, when Aizawa welcomes the big three of UA into the classroom. Everyone would be shocked, but Deku especially. You're that guy from when I took the trash out, Deku would say. This would be when Mirio would laugh. Yep, that's me, Midoriya. Nice to finally meet you, for real. You know, I'm just Sun Eater, I'm just not really trying to... Nejire would then introduce herself, explaining who she was, and all the girls would be fangirling over her, as well as some of the guys, particularly Mineta, admiring her. And eventually, it would come down to when Mirio says that he wants to fight this class, which would get everyone on edge. Bakugo, of course, would be more than happy to battle against this guy. Aizawa would sigh, your funeral if you really want to fight Midoriya. Hey, Midoriya, since this guy's so confident anyway, he is one of the big three after all, I give you permission to baby him. To baby him, Mr. Aizawa? Are you sure? Yeah, go ahead. And thus Deku got the ability and permission to use his Rewind ability to turn Mirio into a small child. Temporarily, of course. Mirio doesn't know what this means. He just says, "But baby?" Class 1A enters the training field where Mirio is waiting, as he has a suit on and everything. The others would also have their hero suits on, ready to fight, as Aizawa, as well as Sun Eater and Nejire would give the countdown. And immediately they begin dropping like flies. Uraraka, Mineta, Ojiro, Yairozu, immediately getting wiped off of the field by Mirio. Mirio coming after Izuku Midoriya Deku next. What he doesn't know is Deku has a one-shot technique that pretty much destroys everyone, which is the baby technique. Immediately as Mirio unphases, he would notice it just as Rewind's about to touch him. The flicker electricity, he would immediately turn permeation back on, barely escaping it. as his clothes would have begun to shrink from the simple atoms touching it. Now, one thing to remember is that Todoroki and Bakugo aren't actually fighting because they didn't pass their hero license exam. So, it's basically just Deku versus Mirio at this point, with some with some classmates helping him. Ida tries to run in for some speed and get an attack in with a kick, only for Mirio to phase right through the attack as Ida goes crashing into a wall. It's all fun and games as Mirio runs towards Midoriya, now trying to be extra careful, trying to hide behind him as he throws a punch trying to knock him out in one hit. Deku would charge Rewind over his entire body like a coil, using One for All to even extend that light. As the moment Mirio's fist touches Deku, Toguta's gone. Instead of Mirio, we have a blonde baby boy. Oh, he got babied. Yep, Mirio would be on the ground and would have been reverted back to a childlike state. Deku using his ultimate ability of Shad Mage. If anyone gets that reference, then make sure to comment down below. Anyway, Deku having claimed victory with Aizawa giving Deku the win, having defeated one of the big three, Bakugo and Todoroki would sigh, with Deku not even having really the skill to defeat Mirio, not even being able to track him. Basically just abusing Rewind's OP abilities. Anyway, this is when Deku would use his Rewind to age Mirio back to where he was before he had first touched him, with Mirio being somewhat scarred and also impressed with this technique. What is that your ultimate move? Deku having never done it before. Yes, it is. I've done it many times, not just to you, Mirio. Well, yeah, that's awesome. What a cool move. Other than your enemies, I feel really bad for. That's terrifying. I would not want to go through school again, Mirio would say. I'm almost graduated. Deku would nod, saying he apologizes. Anyway, with the fight finally ending, this would actually get Mirio to invite Deku to come join them at Night Eye's agency, with him being impressed with Izuku's skills. Thus, Deku would meet Night Eye. When Mirio first introduced Deku, Night Eye would already know about him possessing One for All, and he would not be pleased, with him testing Izuku in the same manner he did in the original, with the two fighting, with Deku having to be able to hit one hit or outmatch him in terms of All Might content. With Deku trying to make Sir Night Eye laugh like Mirio instructed, he would use perfect imitation of All Might's face, to which Night Eye would not be amused. Your crow's eyes is off by 0.3 millimeters. He began correcting Deku, touching his face as he looks directly into his eye, giving him enough requirements to activate his quirk later. Perfect, Night Eye be thinking, now having his plan laid down. Deku would continue to talk with All Might facts, now in super fanboy mode talking to Night Eye, as he analyzes in the background the 10-year anniversary poster that wasn't ever for sale for the public. Well, yes, my face may be off for the traditional All Might face. Do you remember the case where he saved the boy who had the quirk in order to change water's properties? The river was turned to vinegar, and All Might's eyes were then turned down at 0.33 millimeter degrees. That's why my face looks like that, because that's the one that I studied, Deku would say. Night Eye would be slightly impressed with this, and he would sit down at his desk, with Mirio and Deku now explaining why they were there, with Mirio saying that he was hoping that Deku would be able to join here as a work-study student, much like he was. Night Eye would reiterate, saying that it works as a perfectly good hero station with only one mentor, 2 sidekicks, and a single work-study student. What do you bring to the table? Night Eye would say. Prove it to me with actions, not words. I will not be signing this contract until you can take this seal from me, he would say. You have 3 minutes to show me what you can do. Do it, Midoriya. Prove to me that Mirio was a superior candidate for One for All. Prove to me that All Might was mistaken. What did you say? Izuku would ask. I said, let's do this. His eye would suddenly turn black, with purple lines and spheres beginning to cover his iris, and expanding across his entire eye. This is my power. Foresight. Now, take it. Deku would move forward using One for All, trying to lunge for the stamp, with Night Eye easily moving out of the way. Deku would then move his foot back, kicking the ground as he tries to kick a stone slab into the air, trying to knock it out of Night Eye's hand. Nadai easily predicts this, moving back again. Damn! It's like he can see my every move! Izuku would think, lunging forward again with more speed, increasing his power, attempting to completely speed blitz Night-Eye before he can react. This also fails. Fine. Izuku would then access more power as he begins speeding up, bouncing along the ceiling, walls, and floor, as he's trying to catch Night-Eye off guard. While Night-Eye can see Izuku moving in each individual frame using his foresight, what he can't see is incredibly specific details, particularly something that Deku is hiding in his hands and slowly inserting into the floor and walls with every punch of power. Night-Eye would for once be surprised as he sees something else happen. Izuku Midoriya's main quirk, the power of rewind, awakens suddenly. What? As he sees forward into the future, he would then see the entire office filled with... Boom. Suddenly, hundreds of trees and plants would explode outward, shattering the entire room except for the All Might's merchandise. All Might's merchandise being the only thing spared, as everything else in the room is filled with plants, now slamming Night-Eye against a wall, as vines begin to wrap around him. He used the room to lock me in, taking advantage of the small limited space. The opposite of One For All's main qualities, being able to fight in a large open area with power and speed. Impressive. However, he would try throwing it into the air with only a few seconds left before Deku realizes turning up, trying to lunge forward and grab it. Night-Eye grabbing his foot with his other hand, ripping it out of the vine, as Deku barely touches the stamp as it falls to the ground out of his reach, with the clock hitting 3 minutes. Damn it! Night-Eye would also be impressed, but say that he still failed. Also, clean this up. Deku would sigh as he uses rewind to unwind all the plants, as the office is looking worse for wear. This would be when Night-Eye would notice, as Deku's on the ground, saying that he couldn't do it. He wasn't trying to just win. This is when Night-Eye would notice that none of All Might's posters or merchandise was touched or damaged in any way, and would sufficiently impress him. Mirio, I'll take the boy. What? Are you sure? Izuku would ask, tears beginning to slowly fill into his eyes. Yes, I'm sure. And then we get into the painstakingly grueling filler episodes that would partake the rest of Season 4. Kirishima going unbreakable against some drug addict and all that shit with fat gum. And finally, after all those goddamn episodes, we made it to where Deku and Mirio are in the alleyway. Now, Eri has just escaped from her chamber, and Deku and Mirio are now walking, doing their hero things. And this time, let me tell you, this time, when Deku sees Eri, and Eri sees Deku, she realizes who he is, and he does too. When Overhaul comes out and says that that's his daughter, she's just misbehaving or having a temper tantrum. Deku would look at him with the most no shit face he has ever seen, and he tells him, Chisekai, where is my grandfather? And thus, the battle begins between Overhaul for Eri versus Deku. Immediately, Overhaul and his minion would get into battle mode, not expecting to be fighting so soon. I wasn't expecting to fight this rewind brat so quick. Someone with Eri's power, but mastered. I need him. I need him. And thus, he would use Overhaul, as he then forces Spikes of Stone to attack towards Mirio and Deku. Deku would swipe his hand forward using Rewind, as the stone begins to reverse, slamming back into the ground. Eri would be confused as she sees him, as she would have little to no memories of him, because she was like a baby at the time, right? Deku would look to Mirio saying, can he handle this for a second? As she would then turn to Eri, telling her that she's his family, that he was like her big brother, basically. As he would then show her his horn, because he and Eri have the same quirk, effectively. She would be shocked. She'd never seen another person just like her. As she then touches her own horn, Deku showing her his, with her believing him now. Eri, if you wait here for 1 second, I'm gonna go take care of that bad man, Deku would say. Mirio, who would have been holding off Overhaul and his minion for a while now, would already have Night-Eye screaming in his ear, what are you doing? Disengage! Disengage! Leave the girl and run! Deku would immediately shut this down, saying, "This is my younger cousin. I have proof of everything. If you really need any more proof, my mother has birth history and records, and photographs. I'll be taking her away from him. She doesn't belong with someone as messed up as this guy. Especially with the Yakuza." Deku would power into 100% One For All using Rewind. None of that anime plot BS where he tries to play with the villain and then Eri gets taken away and he gets his quirk taken or some shit. Nah. Deku powers to 100% all of One For All, using Rewind to consistently rewind his body physically so that he can access that speed mode, blitzes Overhaul before he can absorb his one minion that was with him, and slams his face into the ground, painting the concrete red. Overhaul is knocked out. Deku uses Rewind to heal him, and they take him into custody, with his right-hand man being taken with Mirio finishing him off, and him and Deku, along with Eri, holding Deku's hand, walking back to Night Eye's station. Deku asks Eri what was going on and happening to her, and she would just cry, holding onto his leg. Deku would pat her, saying she doesn't have to worry, that she can be relaxed around him. Eri, having used her quirk before, killing her parents with it, just like in the original timeline with Rewind. With her emotions finally being able to let out, she would cry as she activates Rewind, covering Deku's entire body, and Deku just using his own Rewind to counter it, basically nullifying the effect. Eri able to use her power with no repercussions, which is really good. Mirio staying away, holding the other two so they don't get erased. Deku would be holding Eri now in his arms, as he would pat her head from behind, Eri now bawling in tears. And that's sort of the end of the Overhaul arc. So, a lot of you guys might be feeling that this is really underwhelming. That's because it is. But the way that this Deku is, and also the fact that he knows Overhaul already from the Forest arc, and that he has his younger cousin, and he actually knows who Eri is, instead of having the same reaction that Deku and Mirio regretted to come to regret in the original timeline, they would just save her here. And Overhaul is way less powerful because none of his minions are there. It's just him and this one guy. And they'd be taken out. The Yakuza would try to get them out of prison, with Deku having tons of proof of them abducting this child and her not being their actual guardianship, proving that his grandfather would have been the natural one to take care of her and that he was in a coma. So the rest of the Overhaul arc is ironically fought in court cases, with Deku's mother, Inko, and him fighting for custody over Eri, arguing that since she is literally his blood cousin and her aunt, that they should take care of her over the Yakuza, who the grandfather was the leader of before he became a comatose patient, which was inflicted by Overhaul. Deku just using Rewind, because Rewind can counter Overhaul, and fixing his grandfather. Him waking up and realizing that it's his grandson. He would give him a hug and ask what was going on. Where's Chisaki? Where's Eri? Where's your mom? Where's my son? That being Eri's parents. And Deku would explain everything to him, explaining how long it's been, what happened to Eri's parents in the awakening of their quirks. And it would be horrifying. That sort of comes to the conclusion of the arc. The rest of the Yakuza who would escape would end up joining the League of Villains, particularly Rappa and the other guardians of the Yakuza who worked under Chisaki, under Overhaul. They would escape, eventually going to go work with the League of Villains, because that was who they were planning with at the time in the actual show, was working out with before, when Overhaul was still their boss. And with no one leading them, that was the next natural conclusion of things. So the Yakuza would be pretty much disbanded, with Eri as well as their grandfather coming to live with Deku and Inko, now having their family all closer together. Due to Eri's powers and the League coming after her, Deku would persuade both his grandfather and his mother that it would be safer if she was kept at UA with him, saying that he could help train her so that she could control her powers even if someone tried to come after her. UA would be for this as well, with Aizawa able to cancel out Eri's quirk, even if Midoriya isn't around to just nullify it. And so that sort of comes to the end, with Deku having Rewind, having all this history built into him, being related to Eri, causing none of the worst parts in some of the deepest, most intriguing scenes of My Hero Academia to happen, including Mirio's quirk being lost, Night Eye's death doesn't happen, Eri doesn't have to worry as much about destroying everything she touches with her power. And she finally is getting to experience what it's like to have an actual family again, with her having a mom in Inko. And while it may be a sort of somber but bittersweet happy ending, I'm going to be ending it here. I hope you guys enjoyed What If Deku Had Rewind. I really like this idea, this concept of Deku and Eri being family. I think the overhaul arc and the end of Eri and Deku coming together, with Deku finally fixing all the ends, Shichikai being put in bars, and everything being fixed to how it was meant to be, is a perfect ending for this series. I will be ending it here for now. That means that once My Hero Academia ends, which will be within the next few years in the manga/anime, I will be adapting the rest of the story, with Eri actually being able to use her powers and Deku training her, as well as Deku being a hero using Rewind and One for All, Night Eye being alive and Mirror of his quirk, and all of that going further into the story. This part was definitely my most rushed of the series. I've been 2 months behind on this one. I wanted to get this out to you guys. I wanted to finish the story up. We'll be ending it here with Eri being recaptured by the heroes, with Eri having her family and meeting her older Nii-chan, and the story ending on a happy note. Of course, there's more things going on, like My Villain Academia, as well as Shigaraki getting all for one, which will be a whole different problem for Deku to deal with, because imagine if Tomura can steal Rewind from either him or Eri. That is going to make him a whole nother monster, because just from what we have in the manga right now, with his regeneration and other abilities, he is crazy. Just imagine that Tomura Shigaraki with Rewind. That is so stupidly broken. Anyway, I've said it once, I've said it again. Now, I hope you guys enjoyed the end, the conclusion, part 9 / the finale for What If Deku Had Rewind. This is my second ever series I've finished, considering this is my only third ever My Hero Academia What If, after What If Deku Had Chakra, and What If Deku was the Juggernaut, which I never finished, but if you guys want to, maybe I can do that. I'll be cutting it off here. Thank you guys so much. I'll be posting more videos soon. If you guys have any My Hero Academia suggestions you want me to do, make sure to let me know in the comments down below, and I'll probably pick a new one to start out with. Hopefully I'll try to post that one more frequently, so it doesn't take a year and a half to finish a 10-part series like this. Like, comment, subscribe. See you guys in the next one. Bye.